Chapter 638. Yi Qinghuan raised her white fingers slightly, and a pale white light flickered from her fingertips, weaving into a net. In the net was Ning Xuema's soul. Ning Xuema's mind raced. She and Yi Qinghuan had never met before, so she shouldn't know her. She opened her eyes wide, looked at Yi Qinghuan in horror, and said in a trembling voice, "You? Why did you catch me? Please let me go." Yi Qinghuan's gaze swept over her. "Where did you come from?" Her voice was cold and magnetic, very pleasant to the ears. She really didn't know her. Ning Xuema trembled even more fiercely, her face at a loss. I'm called a Hua. I'm not a brat. I was sleeping at home, but I don't know how I ended up here. Immortal lady, please spare me. Immortal lady, please spare me." Yi Qinghuan's two disciples could obviously see her, and their faces showed joy. They looked at Yi Qinghuan and said, "Master, perhaps we don't need to catch other souls." Yi Qinghuan nodded slightly. "You can leave. Look after Sharkmen, don't let it commit suicide." "Yes, Master. Master has told us that Sharkmen has to be starved for a few days to make its blood pure. It also needs to be energetic and calm so that its skin will be good. We didn't treat it badly, and we even changed it into a bigger water tank." One of the disciples was eloquent and recited the taboo of raising Sharkmen like it was a book. Yi Qinghuan nodded slightly. "It's good that you remember. When it recovers, we can take its skin tomorrow. You won't serve it anymore." "Yes, Master." The two women agreed in unison and left together. Teach people? She didn't expect that there was really a Sharkman in this world. Because Ning Xuema left the ship early, she didn't know that Yi Feng was that Sharkman. So this thought only flashed in her mind, and she threw it aside. She was more concerned about why Yi Qinghuan caught her. It seemed that she wanted to catch some soul, and then she came to her door. "Why did you catch me? Boo-hoo, I want to go home." Ning Xuema's body trembled even more violently like an ordinary girl. But in his heart he was thinking of a way to escape. Even if Yi Qinghuan did not know him, it was definitely not a good thing to fall into her hands. Ning Xuema tried to use telepathy to contact Kiran, wanting it to report to Rongyue Tianlan. Han Shanyue's whereabouts were unknown. Now, it was estimated that only Rongyue Tianlan had the power to save her from the fire pit. However, she didn't know if it was because she was too far away or if her telepathy had failed. She called out to Kiran in her heart several times, but there was no response. "Don't be afraid." Yi Qinghuan retracted her fingers and Ning Xuema was caught in the net. Yi Qinghuan's voice sounded faintly, "I won't take your life. On the contrary, I want you to live well." She turned around and walked into the hall. Ning Xuema was wrapped in the net, trembling as she followed behind her. Chapter 639. Why don't you enter its body and live in its place? Yi Qinghuan's gaze turned to Ning Xuema, as if she was gently negotiating with her. "I don't want to turn into a cat." Ning Xuema immediately opened her mouth. She was cursing in her heart. Her transmigration was too much. First, she transmigrated into a little girl's body, and now she actually wanted her to turn into a cat. Yi Qinghuan's expression turned cold. "It's your fortune to be able to possess its body. It's not an ordinary cat." "I don't want to be an ordinary cat either. I still want to be a human." Ning Xuema interrupted her. She was calculating in her heart. No matter what, this woman was the ancestor's disciple, and the ancestor was the guardian of this continent. His disciple should also be cultivating the way of immortality. Even if she was bad, she couldn't be that bad. Just like that Abbess Miju in the TV series, no matter how vicious she was still a righteous person. She wouldn't kill the innocent, for example. The several bright reverence religion disciples she had encountered, each and every one of them was filled with righteousness. When they wanted to snatch her things or kill her, they had to find a dignified excuse. If she didn't want to die, Yi Qinghuan might let her go. "Fairy, this cat is obviously not an ordinary cat. I think it's better to let a cat possess its body. If we put a human soul in it, I'm afraid it will change its genes." Yi Qinghuan's expression was originally somewhat impatient, but when she heard the last sentence, her eyebrows slightly raised. "Genes? It's the characteristics of cats. Humans have human characteristics, and cats have cat characteristics. This can't be confused." Ning Xuema tried to reason with her. Yi Qinghuan smiled coldly. All living beings in the 6 realms are just mutual transformations. What's the point of talking about human characteristics and cat characteristics? Today you have to be willing even if you don't want to. She no longer talked nonsense with Ning Xuema. She stretched out her snow-white hand, and the dying cat fell into her palm. She raised her hand and gently stroked the cat's head. Your mission has come to an end. You can come out now. Her hand turned into a claw, and a faint white light shot into the cat's head. The cat's forepaws kicked, and it let out a mournful moan before it stopped moving. A wisp of gray mist emerged from the top of the cat's head. It swayed slightly in the air and gradually condensed into the shape of an old woman. Ning Xuema's heart sank. She didn't expect the cat spirit to be a human soul. This soul looked too old, at least 80 years old. It swayed back and forth, almost unable to stabilize its form. Yi Qinghuan flicked her finger at the pale gray soul. Reincarnate. The pale gray soul let out a muffled cry and dissipated in the air. Yi Qinghuan's gaze turned to Ning Xuema. Chapter 640. The cat's body was like a cage, imprisoning her soul inside. She tried several methods but none of them worked. Damn it! What a perverted woman. The cat's original soul should have died a long time ago. This woman was only trying her best to keep the cat's body. Who knew how many of its cores had been changed? She didn't want to turn into a cat. She would control this body to commit suicide later. Once the cat died, she would be able to escape. Yi Qinghuan seemed to have sensed her thoughts, or perhaps all the previous spirits of this cat had the same idea. She said coldly, "Don't try anything funny. I have set a forbidden spell on this cat. Unless I use a special method to get you out, you won't be able to escape. Once you try to die, your soul will be destroyed." Ning Xuema's body stiffened, and she stared at her with her cat eyes. She started to think about how to deal with this woman. Ning Xuema was the kind of person who wouldn't offend others unless they offended her. If they offended her, she would pay them back 3 times. She didn't have much hostility towards Yi Qinghuan, and she didn't want to deal with her. Now that this woman had offended her, she had to be prepared for her revenge. Yi Qinghuan had a faint floral fragrance on her body, and it didn't smell bad. Ning Xuema knew that it was useless to try anything now, so she lowered her head as if she had accepted her fate. Yi Qinghuan looked at her strangely, as if she didn't expect her to accept her fate so quickly. When other people entered the cat's body, they had to struggle for a few days. They had to go on a hunger strike, bang their heads against the wall, and all kinds of suicidal activities. Of course, she was prepared for all of them. Those people's struggles were useless in her hands. They didn't do anything except suffer more. This time, the spirit she sent to her door was very obedient. Yi Qinghuan was a little happy. She raised her hand and stroked the fur on its back. Good girl. I will bring you around to familiarize you with the environment. After all, you will be living here for more than 10 years. She carried Ning Xuema out. More than 10 years. How could a spirit become so old in more than 10 years? That spirit was definitely not an old person when it was first caught. It was most likely a young girl. It seemed that living in this cat's body made the spirit grow old very quickly. Similar to a cat's lifespan, the Bright Reverence cult's territory was not small, and there were also many disciples. Yi Qinghuan carried it and wandered around. From time to time they would bump into other disciples. These disciples not only bowed respectfully to Yi Qinghuan, but also to the cat in her arms. Little White, did you see that? As long as you stay here obediently, you will be very happy and very powerful. Yi Qinghuan whispered as she stroked the cat's fur. Damn it, why don't you transform into a cat if you're comfortable? Big sister doesn't care for this kind of bluffing. Ning Xuema sneered in her heart. She turned her eyes and observed the terrain, preparing for her escape in the future. Let's go. I'll show you some more good stuff. Yi Qinghuan carried it and walked to a wall. Her finger drew on the wall for a moment, as if she had opened some kind of mechanism. The snow-white wall slowly split open and turned into a moon cave door. Walking through the moon cave door, they saw a bamboo forest. There was a winding stone path that led to the depths of the bamboo forest. The road was paved with multicolored stones. Each stone had its own pattern. Yi Qinghuan's steps were like moving clouds and flowing water, but Ning Xuema could see that the stones she stepped on were all traceable. Chapter 641. Ning Xuema scanned the surroundings again and smiled in her heart. It seemed that there were some good things hidden here. There was a chain of mechanisms. She observed silently. The mechanisms here were quite complicated, one after another. Yi Qinghuan walked very carefully, as if she was afraid of taking a wrong step. Ning Xuema's lips curled up slightly. The mechanisms here might be a life and death situation for others, but for her, who was an expert in mechanisms, it was just child's play. She could break it with a raise of her hand. In the deepest part of the bamboo forest was a large hall. Pushing open the door, Ning Xuema was slightly stunned. She thought that this would be a treasure trove, and the hall would be filled with dazzling jewels. She did not expect that the hall would be so empty, and there were only a few things inside, and they were all unremarkable. There was a treasure shelf in the hall, and on the shelf there were not any treasures but some ordinary things. A brush holder, 2 writing brushes, a jade bowl, an old brocade handkerchief. These were all common things. What was even more strange was that there were 2 praying mats on the shelf. Ning Xuema stared at the praying mat for a while, and found that it looked familiar. She thought for a while and finally remembered. The shape and color of this praying mat was similar to the praying mat that Han Shangyue had casually created. Her eyes swept around the hall, but she didn't find anything that was truly valuable. The most valuable thing was probably the white jade bowl. The quality of the jade was not bad, and it was thin and sparkling. If it was stolen, it could be sold for a few thousand taels of silver. But a few thousand taels of silver was nothing to Ning Xuema now, so she was even less interested in these things. What she was interested in was Yi Qinghuan. She kept so many ordinary things here as if they were her own treasures. Could it be that these things had some special significance? The whole world knew that she liked her master, and these things, could it be that she had secretly collected the venerable emperor's items? Little White, be good here and don't move. I know you understand. If you dare to destroy anything inside, I will pull out your soul and let you taste all kinds of torture. Yi Qinghuan put the cat in her arms on the ground and coldly threatened. Ning Xuema stretched herself on the ground and then lay down. Of course, she wouldn't move recklessly at this moment, but it wouldn't be too late to do so in the future. Yi Qinghuan naturally didn't know what she was thinking. Seeing that it was really obedient, she was satisfied and nodded slightly to it. That's a good girl. She turned around and walked to the treasure shelf. She took out a snow-white handkerchief from her bosom and carefully wiped the items placed on the shelf one by one. Every time she wiped an item, she would explain the origins of the item. For example, the brush holder was a birthday gift from her master. As for the 2 brushes, one belonged to her, and the other belonged to her master. That handkerchief was also the one that her master had used to wipe her sweat. That bowl was even more special. It was personally made by her master. Every item seemed to have a sense of warmth. A sense of warmth when a master and disciple interacted with each other. Ning Xuema lay there, and looked at Yi Qinghuan with a complicated expression. This Yi Qinghuan was really infatuated. She loved her master so much that she went crazy, right? It was simply a kind of bigotry. She didn't know what kind of feelings her master had for Yi Qinghuan at that time. Had he never fallen in love with her? Chapter 642. Or was it because the master had fallen in love with her? But as time passed, his feelings faded? That person didn't seem to care about what others said, so it shouldn't be because gossip was a fearful thing. Ning Xuema had also read some novels and movies about love between master and disciple in her previous life. It was nothing more than the master being cold and the disciple secretly falling in love with the master. At first it was all kinds of sweetness, but once it was clear it was all kinds of hurt. The disciple was hurt again and again, and the master was hurt again and again. Then, for the sake of the world, they continued to hurt each other again and again, until they were hurt so badly that they were hovering between life and death. The best example was the male master and female disciple in Snowflake Sword. It was a combination of all kinds of love stories. The master was noble and cold, and he took in a little girl as his disciple. The disciple was so cute, and she gradually fell in love with the master. She didn't dare to say or let others know, but she secretly collected the master's things and did everything for the master. And the master was all kinds of arrogant, and often a careless action would hurt the disciple. In fact, the master also fell in love with the female disciple, but because of her identity, he naturally couldn't show it. So there were all kinds of hidden injuries in the end. The disciple was forced to become a demon by the master, and a demon would bring disaster to the world. For the sake of the world's peace, the master endured the pain and killed his female disciple. In the end, the female disciple died in his arms. It was the ultimate torture, and it made people cry bitter tears. In the future, many novels about love between master and disciple were created based on this movie, so naturally, there were all kinds of torture. After Ning Shuima watched a few movies, she began to have a shadow of love between master and disciple, because there was only one word for love between master and disciple: torture. Now she saw it with her own eyes from Yi Qinghuan. It was strange, when she read novels or movies about love between master and disciple, she sympathized with the female disciple, but for some reason she didn't sympathize with Yi Qinghuan. If Yi Qinghuan was in love with the master, then this love was meaningless. If she was abandoned by the master, then it was even more meaningless. Why would a scumbag love her? It was hard to find a two-legged toad in this world, but there were plenty of two-legged men. Why did she have to hang herself on a tree? Why did he have to make himself miserable and miserable? Why did he have to do this? Moreover, this woman became a pervert because she liked her master, and Abbess Miju was repulsive. Yi Qinghuan was full of worries and had no one to talk to. The only person she could talk to was this cat. This cat couldn't speak and wouldn't spread her secrets around, but it could understand human language. It was simply the best emotional trash poke. She could tell it what was on her mind. Ning Shuima naturally understood the role she was playing now. Yi Qinghuan was sometimes sad, sometimes happy, and sometimes sad. That was her own story. When Ning Shuima listened to this, it was like listening to a lullaby. She felt a little drowsy. Yi Qinghuan felt that her words were full of passion, but in Ning Shuima's ears, she felt that it was very normal. This was because from the beginning to the end, she didn't hear any truly passionate scenes such as kissing or going to bed. At most it was a little ambiguous. However, the most taboo when listening to a story was to listen to only one side of the story, because that side would exaggerate the things that were most beneficial to her. Therefore, the authenticity of some things had to be greatly discounted. However, Di Zun actually treated his only female disciple differently, didn't he? Chapter 643. For example, after Yi Qinghuan, he didn't accept any female disciples. For example, this disciple was too arrogant on this continent, but the overlord didn't have the intention to interfere. Ning Shuima used her claws to draw circles on the ground unconsciously. She secretly rejoiced that she didn't fall in love with the overlord and didn't agree to be his disciple. Otherwise, years later, Yi Qinghuan's current appearance would be her role model. However, her character was different from Yi Qinghuan's. Yi Qinghuan was very stubborn in this relationship. But she, Ning Shuima, would definitely not do that. Even if it was a one-sided love, if one of them chose to let go, she would definitely not pester him. She would let go faster and more decisively than him. Life was so short and there were so many things to do. Why did she have to let feelings tie her down and make herself like a resentful woman? In fact, there weren't many things in this hall. Yi Qinghuan wiped them one by one, and it only took half an hour to finish. Ning Shuima listened to her nagging for half an hour, and almost didn't move during the whole process. This made Yi Qinghuan even more satisfied. She picked up the cat again. You're the most obedient. When other souls occupied the cat's body, when she brought it to tell stories, those souls were not obedient. They controlled the cat's body and always wanted to destroy it. Of course, those souls couldn't do anything under her eyes. They just needed to suffer a little more to learn to be obedient, because Ning Shuima's obedience made Yi Qinghuan very happy. She walked out with the cat in her arms. Good little white, since you're so obedient, I'll take you to see Sharkmen again. If you're more obedient, I'll reward you with some fish when we kill that Sharkman tomorrow. Sharkmen? It's good to see it. Ning Shuima was a little more spirited. The place where Sharkman was imprisoned was not far from the secret hall. After leaving the enchantment, they took a few turns to the left and arrived. It was also in a courtyard, and there was a pond in the courtyard. The pond water was clear and deep, and there was a column in the middle of the pond. A dark blue figure was tied to the pillar. This should be the legendary Sharkmen. Ning Shuima looked at the Sharkmen and her eyes widened in surprise. Sharkmen! She finally saw the real Sharkmen. The Sharkman's upper body was similar to a human's. His head, neck, shoulders, arms, and hands were all human-like. However, His wrists and other joints were covered with sparkling dark blue scales. Its body was slender, and below its chest was a streamlined fish body. Its long hair was spread over its body like seaweed. Half of its body was above the water, and the other half was underwater. From Ning Xuema's position, she couldn't see its full appearance clearly. Even so, he was still amazed by it. A mermaid. This was a true mermaid. Looking at her slim figure, it was hard to imagine how devastatingly beautiful her face was. She looked at its face again. It lowered its head, and its face was hidden in its long hair. Even close up it was still hazy. There were 2 bright reverence religion disciples guarding this place. When they saw Yi Qinghuan arrive, they came over to salute her. They didn't forget to greet Ning Xuema the cat. Yi Qinghuan's gaze fell on the sharkman's body. She looked at it from head to toe, and then lightly said, "It still won't say a word?" The 2 bright reverence religion disciples nodded, reporting to Master, "It has never opened its mouth. Is it because sharkmen can't speak?" Chapter 644. Yi Qinghuan didn't say anything else. She walked leisurely around the pool, then suddenly opened her mouth and spat out 3 words. Yanziun Sharkman, who had been in meditation with his head lowered, suddenly trembled slightly. He slowly raised his head, and his seaweed-like long hair scattered to the sides like flowing water, revealing a beautiful face. His facial features were deep, his eyes were as blue as the sea, and his gaze was as sharp as a sword. He glanced at Yi Qinghuan. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Yanziun was her friend. When she suddenly heard her friend's name come out from Yi Qinghuan's mouth, she was already a little surprised. She didn't understand how her friend was related to this sharkman. Now that she saw the sharkman's true face, her heart sank. This sharkman's face actually faintly resembled Yi Feng's. Could it be that the taciturn shadow guard by Yanziuan's side, Yi Feng, was sharkman? Ning Xuema's cat eyes stared at the sharkman in deep thought. The sharkman seemed to have noticed Ning Xuema's gaze, and actually also looked at her. The cat and shark's gazes met in the air. A glimmer of light flashed through the sharkman's eyes, and then he lowered his eyes and lowered his head. Yi Qinghuan's lips curved slightly as if she was smiling. "You really do have thoughts about that little girl. Do you want to see her?" The sharkman's head lowered even more, and he didn't respond. "As long as you open your mouth and say a few words, this lord can let you see her." The sharkman still didn't speak, as if he didn't hear her words. Ning Xuema was a little puzzled. Why did Yi Qinghuan have to force the sharkman to speak? Could it be that she had a motive? Yi Qinghuan asked a few more questions, and even threatened the sharkman with Yanziuan's life, wanting to force the sharkman to speak. However, the sharkman seemed to have steeled his heart and didn't respond no matter what. It didn't even have any reaction. Yi Qinghuan's 2 disciples were finally a little uncertain. "Master, perhaps it really can't speak. We haven't heard it speak even once in the past 3 days." The 2 disciples talked back and forth, and Yi Qinghuan seemed to be a little uncertain. He looked at sharkmen again and said warmly, "I've often heard people say that sharkmen are good at singing. If you sing a song for me and sing well, I might let you go back to your hometown." Sharkman still had no reaction. Yi Qinghuan's face turned cold and she glanced at her disciple. That disciple understood and immediately said, "You sharkmen don't fail to appreciate kindness. Our sect master is merciful and kind. That day in the chaotic river, she saved your life and even spent countless spirit herbs to treat your injuries. Now she only wants you to sing a song and you still won't do it? Are you sharkmen also heartless?" The other disciple also said, "Just sing a song, even if it's just a short part. If it's pleasing to the sect master's ears, she will let you go and let you go back to the mermaid clan, okay?" The 2 disciples were very good with words. They threatened, enticed, moved with emotion and reasoned with reason. They used all kinds of tricks, but the mermaid turned a deaf ear to them and did not give them any reaction. Ning Xuema also kept looking at that sharkman. Now she believed that this sharkman was Yi Feng. This sharkman's style was the same as Yi Feng's. They were tolerant, silent, and had their own opinions. They wouldn't be easily swayed by the words of others. Xuema now vaguely understood Yi Qinghuan's purpose. She was just teasing this sharkman to talk so that it would tell her the location of the sharkman's family so that it would be easier to capture more. Yi Feng should be clear about Yi Qinghuan's thoughts, So he had been acting dumb and didn't say a word. Chapter 645. In the end, Yi Qinghuan didn't know its real identity and couldn't do anything to it. Yi Qinghuan stood there for a long time and didn't get what she wanted. Finally, she gave up and said, "You're on your own." Then she picked up the cat and left. Yi Qinghuan took Ning Xuema to a few places to let her familiarize herself with the layout of this place. Seeing that it was very obedient, she was relieved. After returning to her own main hall, she stroked the cat's head and said, "I'm going to meditate. You go play by yourself. Remember, don't try to escape. Even if there are 10 of you, you won't be able to escape from my palm." The cat nodded and even used its head to rub against her body, looking very obedient. Yi Qinghuan smiled with satisfaction. It was just an ordinary little soul. In her sect where experts were everywhere, what kind of tricks could it play? She raised her hand and stroked its back fur. "Go." Then she went to meditate. Ning Xuema turned around and ran out. This cat's status in this sect was obviously not low. In the process of Ning Xuema strolling around, she met several groups of disciples. Even if Yi Qinghuan wasn't in front of her, these people still greeted her. Ning Xuema strolled leisurely, as if she was admiring the scenery. The others were obviously used to this cat. As long as it didn't leave the Bright Reverence School's territory, they wouldn't care about it. Ning Xuema strolled to the place where Sharkman was imprisoned. The two disciples were still guarding there. They were bored here all the time. When they saw Ning Xuema arrive, they were happy and called her over to talk to her to relieve their boredom. Ning Xuema was now a cat. She didn't need to talk. She only needed to proudly allow them to stroke her fur, which made them very happy. This cat was born good-looking. With long snow-white fur, when it ran it looked like a rolling snowball. It was very lively and cute. Most of the girls liked this kind of small animal. Ning Xuema's cute appearance made them even happier. So they let her wander around. "Ning Xuema?" A deep magnetic voice sounded in Ning Xuema's heart. Ning Xuema looked at the pool with her cat eyes. Sharkmen in the pool did not react, but Ning Xuema knew clearly that the sound came from sharkmen. This was not a sound transmission technique, but a sound wave that only animals could hear. Ning Xuema looked at the two Bright Reverence Religion disciples and saw that they didn't have any reaction. "Yifeng." Ning Xuema also tried to meow. The meow that came out of her mouth was the standard cat language. It was a very delicate meow. It couldn't be helped. Cat's voice was just like that. She couldn't make human sounds. The sharkmen in the pool, however, understood. "It really is you. Why are you here?" Ning Xuema wanted to smile bitterly. Her experience was too bizarre. She was afraid that she couldn't explain it clearly in a few words. She didn't answer Yifeng's question. She was also very curious about Yifeng's experience when he fell into Yi Qinghuan's hands. But now was obviously not the time to ask about this. Therefore, she opened her mouth and asked the most important question. "Yi Qinghuan wants your skin and flesh. Do you have a way to escape?" Yifeng's tone was slightly sad. "She used cold iron chains to lock my shoulder blades. If I can't untie the cold iron chains, I can't escape." Ning Xuema jumped into the pool and stared at the cold iron chains for a moment. Then she opened her mouth again. "What if I have a way to untie your cold iron chains? There are many experts here and the security is tight. Can you escape?" "Yes. As long as my body is free, I can use the water escape technique in the water," Yifeng said confidently. One of the distant relatives of the two disciples was among the invited guests. Girls loved to gossip. While they were chatting happily, a voice suddenly sounded behind them. "The daughter of Daoyang's city lord? Yin Ziyuan. She's getting married? With who?" The voice was low and magnetic with a slight tremor, but it was very pleasant to the ears. The two disciples suddenly turned their heads and stared at sharkmen in the pool in disbelief. You can talk." Yifeng's dark blue eyes seemed to be shining. "Answer me, who is she getting married to?" Chapter 647. One of the disciples knew the details and subconsciously replied, "I heard that it was her zither master, called something Gu Zian." Yifeng slightly closed his eyes and slowly clenched his fists. Was she going to marry that man? That man was clearly not worthy of her. The two female disciples looked at each other. Sharkmen finally spoke. Should they quickly report this good news to their master? One of the disciples said, "You stay here and watch." She turned around and ran. "You stop, I have a message for your master." Yifeng suddenly spoke again. That disciple, who was about to run, stopped. He turned around and looked at Yifeng. "What message do you have for our master?" "Actually, master will definitely come later. It's the same if you tell her face to face." Her voice became softer and softer until she didn't know what to say. Yifeng's pair of eyes stared at the two disciples. The bottom of his eyes was like the azure ocean, slowly stirring up a whirlpool. The two disciples' minds exploded, and the expression they looked at him with turned into a daze. Yifeng's voice was slow and gentle. "Come here, you two, come here." The two disciples seemed to be bewitched and they couldn't help but walk forward. They gradually came to the edge of the pool. The pool was very deep. It was more than 10 meters deep. If they fell in, they would lose their lives. Fear appeared on the faces of the two men, but their minds seemed to be controlled. They could only watch helplessly as their feet stepped into the pool, and finally, with a splash, they fell into the pool. When Ning Xuemo ran back with the key in one hand, she saw the two disciples struggling in the water. They seemed to want to open their mouths and shout for help, but their minds seemed to be controlled. Their mouths opened and closed, but they couldn't shout. When they saw Ning Xuemo coming, their eyes showed a pleading look. They looked very pitiful. Ning Xuemo slowed down and looked at Yifeng. Yifeng lowered his eyes and said, "We have to escape. They must die." Ning Xuemo naturally understood in her heart that these two people had been guarding this place all along. Once she and Yifeng made any movements, they would not be able to hide it from their eyes and would immediately shout out. It was a life and death situation. At this time there was no room for mercy and kindness. She took a deep breath and didn't look at the two people. Instead, she jumped into the water and swam towards Yifeng. She was good at opening and closing the lock. Although it wasn't that easy to open the lock with the cat claws, she had good control. After a while, the cold iron lock was opened by her. "Thank you." Yifeng's shoulder was bleeding profusely. He raised his hand and pressed 2 fingers on his shoulder to stop the bleeding. At this time there seemed to be some chaotic movement outside. There were messy footsteps, people shouting and people screaming. Yifeng's face changed. Could it be that Ning Xuemo's theft of the key was exposed so quickly? Ning Xuemo seemed to know what he was thinking. She immediately said, "Don't worry. They are going in another direction. No one can care about this place for now." Yifeng was also a clever person. When he saw Ning Xuemo's eyes, he knew that she must have done something. He finally breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't dare to be negligent. He hugged the wet cat beside him and made a hand seal. Chapter 648. After a while, there was no sign of the mermaid and the cat in the pool. Only the bodies of the 2 drowned disciples were left floating on the water. Yi Qinghuan didn't meditate for a long time at noon every day. She usually finished it in an hour. Instead of meditating, it was better to say that she just took a nap. During this period, no disciples were allowed to disturb her. It was the same this time. After meditating for an hour, she naturally came back to her senses. She opened the door and walked out. Yi Qinghuan wanted to walk around her own territory and look for her cat. Unexpectedly, as soon as she opened the door, she heard a faint noise outside. She frowned slightly. She imitated the temper of her master, Di Zun, in everything. She liked to be quiet and didn't like noise. Her disciples were also taught by her to pay attention to every action of theirs. They were quiet, calm and self-controlled. They hated noise the most. Even if the sky fell, they had to deal with it calmly. Her face darkened, and she sent out a voice transmission. "Who is making noise outside?" As soon as she finished speaking, a disciple hurried in. When he entered the door, he even tripped over something and fell to his knees. "Master, something bad happened." Yi Qinghuan's face darkened again. "How did I teach you? You have to be calm and not panic. This is the main principle of our sect. As my direct disciple, how can you be so panicky? Slap yourself 10 times first." The disciple was stunned. He knew that he couldn't go against his master's words, so he could only clench his teeth and slap himself 10 times. In front of his master, he couldn't beat himself. After slapping himself 10 times, His cheeks were red and swollen, and blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth. Yi Qinghuan watched him finish slapping himself, and then asked leisurely, "What's the noise outside?" The disciple calmed down and then reported, "Master, I don't know why a door suddenly cracked open on the south wall of the Lingxiang garden. There were countless bamboos behind the door, and there seemed to be a house deep in the bamboo forest. There was smoke coming out of the house as if there was a fire." Before he could fully report, his master's figure disappeared in front of him. The disciple was speechless. Since when did master lose his composure? Yi Qinghuan arrived at the Lingxiang garden like a gust of wind. At a glance, she saw that her disciples had surrounded a place with 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. There was smoke coming from that place and all kinds of fire-extinguishing spells were flashing there. Yi Qinghuan's vision turned black, her legs went soft and she staggered. Her secret treasure trove. She rushed over, and before she even reached them, she suddenly waved her sleeves. A hurricane came out of her sleeves, blowing the disciples in front of her off their feet. Naturally, it also blew open a path. Chapter 649. These disciples who had lost their lives were all elite disciples of the sect, who were proficient in water-type spells. Now they had died here for no reason, and they were shot to death by their own traps. If this matter were to spread out, it would be the biggest joke in the world. However, she couldn't care less about these disciples at this time. Her mind was on the secret hall in the depths of the bamboo forest. Her painstaking collection, she was flustered and almost stepped on those traps several times. When she staggered around the bamboo forest and finally saw the full appearance of the main hall, her entire heart sank into the abyss. Thick smoke billowed from the hall, and flames soared into the sky. More than half of the hall had been burned down, and the remaining part was crackling in the fire. It looked like it was about to collapse. Yi Qinghuan's vision turned dark. She forced herself to calm down and tried her best to comfort herself. Don't worry. Don't worry. Although her treasures were placed in the hall, she had set up a fireproof enchantment on the shelf where the treasures were placed. Even if the entire hall was burned to ashes, her precious treasures should be fine. As long as her precious treasures were fine, what was the big deal about burning down the hall? She could order people to build it again. At most, a large number of disciples who built this secret hall would be sacrificed. She immediately cast a water-type spell to summon rainwater. The heavy rain poured down on the hall. The heavy rain, like seawater pouring down, finally put out the fire. Yi Qinghuan didn't care about the remaining flames and rushed into the crumbling hall. Then, as if she was fixed in place, her face turned pale, and she couldn't move anymore. Her shelf of treasures had been burned to a few pieces of wood. Those praying mats, handkerchiefs, brush holders, writing brushes, jade bowls. Some of them were burned to ashes, some were burned to ashes, and none of them could be seen. Plop! Yi Qinghuan stared blankly and sat on the ground. Those things were her painstakingly collected. They were her mental support for all these years. They were the only thing she could comfort herself with. But now they were all burned to ashes. Clean. Not even a small piece was left for her. Who was so vicious? Who knew that these things were her precious treasures? Who could destroy her enchantment and set off such a deadly fire? Her mind buzzed and almost immediately, she thought of that cat. To be exact, he thought of Ning Shuima who had taken over the cat's body. Could it be that in order to take revenge on her, that living soul had destroyed her most beloved? She had only brought the cat into this place before, and it had also talked about how important those things were to her. The others, even her most trusted disciples, didn't know of such a place. The disciples who built this secret palace were all killed by her, and even their souls were scattered. It was impossible for him to have leaked this secret. The only possibility was the cat. However, that was merely an ordinary living soul. Did it have the ability to break through these layers of mechanisms? Impossible, right? How could such a little girl have such an ability? She took a deep breath, then another. She jumped up from the ground and rushed out like a whirlwind. The other disciples of Bright Reverence cult were still guarding the courtyard's entrance, not daring to disperse. When Yi Qinghuan rushed out, everyone was shocked again. Their master, who had always been dressed neatly and would not have a single strand of hair out of place even when a fire was burning in the room, was now half covered in mud and his face was covered in soot. Chapter 650. Yiqing Wan appeared in front of the disciples like a madwoman with a head of messy hair. A few of them even thought that it was some kind of monster because of their blurred vision. They almost attacked it. Fortunately, Yiqing Wan pulled back her hair and revealed her face, allowing these people to recognize her. Although these people were shocked, they still knelt down in unison. Master. Yiqing Wan naturally saw the surprise in the disciples' eyes, but at this time she couldn't care less and asked, "Where's Xiao Bai?" The disciples all looked at each other. They hadn't seen that proud cat for a while. Finally, a disciple remembered, "Master, an hour ago, disciple saw His Highness Xiao Bai go to the beast transformation pond." The beast transformation pond was where Sharkman was being held. Yiqing Wan's face changed again. But she didn't speak, her figure flashing as she rushed directly towards the beast transformation pond. At the edge of the beast transformation pond, the water was still deep and the pillar was still there, but Sharkman was nowhere to be seen. Two corpses floated in the pond, their bellies bulging and their faces blue. Obviously they had drowned. Yiqing Wan stood at the edge of the pond, her fingers clenched tightly. If it was said that she had some suspicions before, doubting whether Ning Shuama, this little soul, had the heart to do such a thing but did not have the ability to do so, now that she saw everything before her eyes, she was 80 to 90% sure that it was Ning Shuama's doing. That little bastard girl, besides her beautiful appearance, her other abilities were ordinary, but she had never expected her to have such means. She had misjudged. She had really misjudged her. And this time, she had paid a heavy price for her misjudgment. For so many years, no one had been able to make her suffer such a big loss. She had suffered such a big setback. When her anger reached its peak, she calmed down and immediately summoned the souls of the two disciples. From their mouths she learned that her guess was not wrong. When the two disciples were on the verge of death, they did see the cat running over with the key in its claws, swimming directly towards Sharkman and opening the chains for him. They didn't see what happened after that because they died, but what happened before was enough to prove that Sharkman was indeed saved by the cat. Yiqing Wan was so regretful that she wanted to vomit blood. She thought that Ning Shuama was a well-behaved girl who was rarely obedient. She thought that Ning Shuama was the least tiring girl. However, she didn't expect that everything was just an illusion. That girl was clearly a black-bellied ancestor. Her revenge was simply a direct hit to a person's weak spot. This kind of revenge was the most ruthless. That girl. That scoundrel. She was going to capture that scoundrel girl and crush her soul inch by inch. She was going to tear her apart bit by bit. She was going to make her beg for death. She quickly looked around and finally confirmed that the Sharkmen and the cat had escaped through the water. She snorted coldly. Water escape technique? She knew how to do it too. Sharkman's wounds were still bleeding. She followed the trail of Sharkman's blood. She did not believe that a cat like Sharkman could escape from her pursuit. What's more, Sharkman's blood had a special fragrance that made it easy to track him down. With a flash of light, she disappeared from the pool as well. Yifeng carried Ning Shuama and moved through the water like a barracuda. He walked through the underground river. The underground river was ever-changing, and there were countless of them. Ning Shuama was wrapped in a water bubble, so she couldn't see anything clearly. Chapter 651. The cat that Ning Shuama possessed had an average aptitude, so it couldn't practice any martial arts. Otherwise, Yiqing Wan would have let it practice the art of immortality to accompany her since she loved this cat so much. She didn't need to change the soul inside it frequently to maintain its life. In such a dark underground, Ning Shuama could only see about 30 to 40 feet away. Any further and everything would be a blur. But the scenery of 30 to 40 feet away was too much for her to take in. The experience of walking through the underground water vein was very wonderful. There were all kinds of strangely shaped rocks, underground caves, and stalactites. She was surrounded by a dazzling sight. Yifeng took her through the tunnel very fast, giving her the illusion that she was riding a high-speed train underground. The bubble that Yifeng set up around her was not too big. After walking for about half an hour underground, she felt a little suffocated. When she was in her original form, she could hold her breath for a long time. But now this cat was an ordinary cat, so she couldn't really regulate her breath. Yifeng didn't seem to expect her cat body to be so weak. Seeing that her expression was not right, he immediately went up. He should have gone deep underground, and it took him a lot of effort to follow the water vein. When he came out of the water with the cat, Ning Shuima's cat face was about to turn blue. Yi Feng broke the bubble, and Ning Shuima immediately lay on the water surface to breathe. I'm sorry. Yi Feng's voice was a little apologetic. Ning Shuima finally breathed evenly. She looked at him and asked, Do you have something on your mind? Yi Feng was a bold and careful secret guard. If he didn't have anything on his mind, he would have paid attention to the cat in his arms all the time, instead of waiting until she was suffocating to find out. Yi Feng was stunned. He lowered his eyes and didn't say anything. He did have something on his mind, and it was Yan Ziyuan. The first thing he wanted to do after he got out was to see her, but he didn't dare to. Ever since he knew that Yan Ziyuan's wedding was in half a month, he had been restless. Although he was already mentally prepared for this outcome, he still wanted to escape when faced with it. It was also because of his uneasiness that he neglected many things during his escape. For example, he had to hide his whereabouts, or his wounds that were still bleeding from time to time. Ning Shuima's nose was sharp, and she quickly smelled the unique sweet and fishy smell on his body. Her heart sank, and she finally saw the wounds on his body. After all, Yi Feng had been pierced through by the black iron chain, and there were 2 huge bloody wounds on his shoulders. Although Yi Feng had treated his wounds simply, the wounds were still too big, and blood still oozed out from time to time. She seemed to have thought of something. I heard that Yi Qinghuan is a martial arts genius who has 5 types of spiritual roots in her body. Is it true? Yi Feng was still a little absent-minded. He nodded subconsciously. I heard so. It's precisely because she's such a rare genius that the ancestor made an exception to accept her. After saying this, his face also changed. If Yi Qinghuan had all 5 elements, she should also know the water escape technique. She might follow the water vein and chase after them. He picked up Ning Shuima and said, We have to go quickly. Ning Shuima took a breath. If Yi Qinghuan's water escape technique is very strong, and you are injured, we can't outrun her. We can't escape from her if we run blindly. Listen to my command. She quickly told him her plan. Chapter 652. Yi Feng couldn't help but glance at the cat in his arms. He really didn't expect this girl to be an expert in anti-tracking, even better than him, a professional expert. He was also a man of action. He immediately took Ning Shuima deep into the water vein, and came to a place where the water veins were mixed. This place was like a spider web that extended in all directions, and the water veins were radiating in all directions. Yi Feng dripped the blood on his body into more than 20 water veins, leaving only 3 or 4 without blood. Then he went into one of the blood-stained water veins and continued to move forward along that water vein. The next time he took a breath and returned to the surface, he carefully treated the wounds on his body. There was no more blood flowing from his shoulders. Only then did he return to the underground water veins. In the future, whenever he encountered those kinds of crossroads with mixed water veins, he would drip his blood into all the water veins. The underground water veins were intricate and complicated, and the water was constantly flowing, carrying his blood in all directions. He believed that even if Yi Qinghuan chased after him by following the smell of blood on his body, she would get lost in these crossroads and wouldn't be able to find any trace of him in Ning Shuima. Because Ning Shuima was always wrapped in his bubble, not a trace of her breath leaked out, so Yi Feng didn't have to bother to help Ning Shuima hide her tracks. This idea was thought of by Ning Shuima, and Yi Feng carried it out very thoroughly. When Yi Qinghuan tracked those water veins, she was indeed confused by the smell of Sharkman's blood at those crossroads, and couldn't figure out their direction for a moment. They had really lost him. Damn it! Yi Qinghuan was so angry that her hair stood on end. Her opponent was too cunning, and it was really beyond her expectations. She was so angry that she wanted to curse and swear. But when she was thinking about it in her mind, she suddenly remembered that she didn't even know the name of the little soul that caused her such a disaster. She couldn't even find the name of the soul. After she chased after a few water veins in vain, she finally understood that such a method of chasing was useless. However, she was not willing to give up just like that. She stopped in place for a moment and decided to rise to the ground. She sent a telepathic message to her trusted disciple, asking him to send the literary letter fish over. The Wenxin fish was best at tracking in the water. they could distinguish the strength of the person they were tracking in the water. Although the sharkman had dripped his blood into the water veins at every fork, the strength of his aura was different from when he had passed through them. She couldn't tell, but the Wuxia fish could. This time, no matter what, she had to catch up with that cat. Capture that little soul alive and slowly execute him to relieve the hatred in his heart. She had used the water route to track him, and the speed of the water route was naturally slower than the speed of flying. Therefore, after her trusted disciple received the message, he brought the fish to her on the fastest blue luan bird. The Wuxia fish did not disappoint. After circling around the water vein, they quickly found the path Yifeng had taken. However, because there were too many underground water veins and too many forks, although the messenger fish could eventually find the correct path, it would still take a lot of time. In this way, Yi Qingwan's tracking speed slowed down a lot. After all, she was a person who had cultivated for many years and was scheming enough. To be on the safe side, she ordered her disciples to each ride a rare bird in the air and search along the water route she had taken. Even if the sharkmen didn't need to come to the water surface to breathe, that cat still needed to. Chapter 653. The man and the cat would definitely return to the surface of the water to take a breath every once in a while. She did not believe that the sharkmen would be able to escape from her grasp with the cat and the water at the same time. After the fresh rain, autumn arrived in the late autumn. When Yifeng brought Ning Shuama out of the water again, they were in a deep pond in the middle of a mountain. It had just rained outside, and the green grass by the pond was swaying in the wind with countless fine water droplets. The air was so fresh that it made people want to take a second breath after taking a breath. A few stars were twinkling in the sky, and it was already nighttime. Yifeng had been running with Ning Shuama for the whole afternoon. They had already run for nearly 1,000 miles and passed through 200 to 300 crossroads, but they did not see any pursuers. Yifeng breathed a sigh of relief. He was tired after running for so long, and he urgently needed to eat something to replenish his energy. Ning Shuama was also very hungry at this time, so the two of them discussed and decided to stay in the mountain for a little longer to eat something first. Yifeng caught 3 fat fish along the way, and after coming ashore, he made a fire and set it up to barbecue. Ning Shuama laid on the side and watched him busying himself. She watched as his beautiful fishtail slapped against the ground. Unexpectedly, it was similar to a human's legs. He walked very nimbly on the ground. She held back and finally could not help but say, "Yifeng, so you also eat fish?" Seeing how he handled the fish so neatly, she could tell that he was an expert. Yifeng did not stop moving and said calmly, "Sharkmen live in the sea all year round, so they naturally eat sea creatures as their food. Fish is their staple food." That's right, the creatures in the sea are the same as the creatures on land. The weak are prey to the strong. It all depends on who is standing at the top of the food chain. Do sharkmen usually cook their food like humans do before eating? Ning Shuama was very curious. After escaping from danger, her state of mind also calmed down quite a bit. Gossiping cells were starting to grow in him. Yifeng paused for a moment, and his ocean blue eyes grew somewhat distant. "It's true that it's cooked, but we're using sea fire, not firewood." He handed a grilled fish to Ning Shuama. "Earlier. I'm sorry if I hurt you." Ning Shuama knew that he was talking about how he used her to threaten Shui Lan on the ship a few days ago. She shook her head and said, "It's okay. You didn't really hurt me." Yifeng's knife was pressed against her waist at that time. Although she was bleeding, he had stabbed her diagonally. What he had pierced was only a layer of her skin. He did not hurt her vital parts at all. She was indeed hungry. She held the fish in her paws and ate a few mouthfuls. Her cat eyes sparkled. Delicious. "Yifeng, I didn't expect your cooking skills to be so good." Men with good cooking skills were all good men. If she didn't know that Yifeng's heart belonged to someone else, Ning Shuama would have packed him up and kept him by her side. Yifeng smiled at her praise, but he didn't say anything. Just as he smiled, he seemed to have thought of something. His eyes dimmed, and the smile on his lips slowly turned cold. He wasn't a talkative person. In the blink of an eye, he had finished grilling another fish and was eating it himself. "Yifeng, the fish you grilled with firewood is also very delicious. It seems like you've been on land for a while." Ning Shuama chatted with him. Yifeng paused for a moment. It's not that long. It's been 3 years. For the past 3 years he had been quietly guarding Yan Ziyuan, protecting her from all dangers. If they didn't want to become food for other sea tribes, they had to think of ways to make themselves and their tribe stronger. So most sharkmen were like the people in the world. They were very diligent in their martial arts. Yifeng was one of the best. Every day, other than dealing with the necessary affairs, he spent most of his time practicing martial arts. He wanted to protect his tribe and the people he wanted to protect. After all, Yi was young. She was lively and playful. With Yifeng as her big protective umbrella, she practiced martial arts carelessly. She often pestered Yifeng, wanting Yifeng to accompany her to play. Yifeng naturally didn't have time to accompany her most of the time. Chapter 655. In order to relieve Yiyu's boredom, Yifeng often searched for some storybooks in the human world for her to read. The source of these storybooks was naturally the merchant ships that encountered strong winds and waves on the sea. Yiyu did not know which storybook hit her romantic nerve. She did not know when she started to have something on her mind and started to yearn for life in the human world. Just like the story of the little mermaid that Ning Shuima heard, Yiyu started to pay attention to the passing merchant ships. She often sneaked out to look at the people on the merchant ships. Once, because she peeked out too much and was too close to a merchant ship, she was discovered by a master of psychokinesis on the ship and was almost caught. It was Yifeng who arrived in time and rescued Yiyu, who was trapped in the net of law. Yiyu was injured by the net. In his fury, Yifeng overturned the boat with a violent storm, causing the people on the boat to be buried with him. What he did not expect was that the master who almost caught Yiyu was a master of water. That person was only seriously injured in the storm and did not die. That person was very handsome, elegant. Not only was he a master of psychokinesis, but he was also good at music and played the guqin well. Before the ship capsized, all the women on the ship were moved by his elegant demeanor and were obsessed with him. Yiyu was also fascinated by his elegant demeanor and forgot about the danger. She was so close to the merchant ship. With the help of Yifeng's medicine, Yiyu's injury healed quickly and she was alive and kicking the next day. She remembered the man who fascinated her, so she sneaked out and wandered around the vicinity of the shipwreck. She did not know whether it was fate or misfortune, but she actually found the dying man on a reef. A young girl's feelings were always poetic. Young girls were also the most impulsive and reckless when doing things. She was hot-headed and saved the man. She was also afraid that Yifeng would not allow her to save the man, so she did not dare to bring him back to the Sharkmen. Instead, she hid him on an isolated island. Every day she would send all kinds of food and medicine to the man. With enough food and medicine, the man's injury healed quickly and Yiyu became more and more obsessed with him day by day. Not only did she bring him medicine and food, but she also found his zither at the bottom of the sea for him. That person often played the piano for her in his free time. The man and the shark got along very well. Yiyu was very naive, and at the age where she was dreaming, she quickly regarded this elegant and romantic man as her Prince Charming. She ran to this island every day to meet this man in secret. Yifeng had not noticed her because he was busy with the internal affairs of the mermaid race. By the time he realized something was wrong with Yiyu, it was already too late. Chapter 656. Yiyu looked at him for a moment, kowtowed to him, and then chose the latter. She carried that person to land at this point. Yifeng's voice trembled a little, and the branch in his hand broke into two with a cracking sound. I was seriously injured at that time, and when I saw her carrying that person away without looking back, I was so hurt and angry that I really wanted to cut off all ties with her, so I didn't ask anything about her. Yifeng took another breath, stabilized his voice, and continued to speak faintly. His feelings for Yiyu were never that of a sibling. He liked her, so he practiced martial arts with all his might, trying his best to become stronger, just to protect the person he loved. Yiyu's actions broke his heart, so he started to drink and get drunk, and started to fall in love with other mermaids, and forbade others from talking about Yiyu in front of him. Yifeng didn't know at that time that Yiyu encountered other ferocious sea tribe members on the way back to land, and almost lost her life. He didn't know that she cried and used the conch to call him over and over again, asking him to save her. He was dead drunk at that time, and because he wanted to cut off all ties with Yi, he threw the conch to the bottom of the sea. Not only did Yi's cries not call Yifeng over, but it also made the other shark men, who had once coveted her beauty, rush over to take advantage of the situation. If it wasn't for the fact that they coincidentally encountered a ship, and that there were experts on the ship, perhaps that person and Yi would have died in this pincer attack. That man was saved, and Yi was also brought onto the ship. Although the sharkmen could transform on land and become like ordinary people, they were still members of the sea tribe. When they arrived on land, every step they took was like stepping on the tip of a knife, and every step they took was so painful that they wished they were dead. Therefore, the sharkmen wouldn't go ashore easily. No one in the sharkmen knew what Yi went through after she went ashore. There was a kind of poison in this world called lovesickness, and there was a kind of feeling in this world called unrequited love. The two of them didn't feel anything when they were together. But once they were separated, they would know that the pain of separation was heart-wrenching and unforgettable. Yifeng suffered the cruelest betrayal from his lover. Although he missed Yi deeply, he didn't want to look for her. He didn't even want to hear any news about her. In order to let himself walk out of this emotional trauma as soon as possible, he accepted the love of another woman from the mermaid clan and got engaged with her. The next time he saw Yi was 3 months later, at his engagement party with sharkmen. Yi came back alone without any warning at all. When he was drinking the engagement wine with his fiancée, he saw Yi standing at the entrance of the hall with a deathly pale face. The moment Yifeng saw her for the first time, he didn't know what he was feeling. He knew that he had never been able to forget Yi. When he saw the figure that he had yearned for day and night, he couldn't tell if he was angry or ecstatic. He coldly asked her why she came back. He coldly told her that the mermaid clan had removed her name. However, he secretly hoped that she would say a few words. As long as she turned back and called him brother again, he would decide to forgive her and hug her in his arms. However, he didn't expect Yi to just smile faintly. She said that she came back to ask the high priest of the mermaid clan to split her legs. She didn't want to suffer the pain of walking on land like walking on the tip of a knife. She wanted to be done once and for all. Chapter 657. The high priestess of the mermaid tribe could indeed split the tail of the sharkmen into 2 legs, and turn the sharkmen into a human. However, the consequence of this was that once the leg-splitting technique was done, she would become a real human. Although she could walk freely on land, she would forever lose the qualification to be a sharkman. Not only would she lose the lifespan of a sharkman, but she would also not be able to enter the land of the sharkmen. Yifeng did not expect Yi to be so resolute and so infatuated with that human. He was so angry at that time. After a long pause, he asked her coldly if she had really thought it through, because the leg-splitting technique was also very painful. She would have to endure the pain for 2 days. He listed all the pros and cons of this spell to her, hoping that she would say that she regretted it. However, Yi was determined and said that she had thought it through and would not regret it. The high priestess of the mermaid tribe saw that Yifeng was not happy and did not want to agree. In the end, Yi knelt in front of Yifeng and kept kowtowing, begging him to help her. She kowtowed until her forehead was full of blood. She said that she would not get up if he did not agree. She said that she was sorry for stabbing him that day, and that she had received the punishment she deserved. She begged him to help her this time because they were siblings. She said that she would never bother him again. Yifeng was angry and desperate. In the end, he finally agreed to her request. The pain of leg splitting was bone-piercing. Even the strong sharkmen did not dare to try it. For thousands of years there were very few sharkmen who dared to split their legs. However, Yi, who had always been afraid of pain and needed people to comfort her for a long time, did it without hesitation. When she walked into the high priestess room to do the surgery, Yifeng did not send her off because he was angry. However, he secretly sent a capable subordinate to check the settings in the high priestess room. He hoped that the leg-splitting technique would be foolproof. Although he hated Yi, he could not accept that she had any accidents during the process. During those 2 days she underwent the surgery indoors while he lingered outside, never taking a single step out of the room. Even a grown man wouldn't be able to withstand that kind of pain, let alone the delicate Yi. She couldn't help but scream out loud. Each of her screams was like a knife, cutting into Yifeng's heart inch by inch. He was restless outside, and there were several times when he wanted to rush in without a care. However, he also knew that once this kind of surgery started, there was no room for regret. He had to finish it. For Yiyu, every minute and second of those 2 days was torture. How could it not be the same for Yifeng? In the end, he couldn't stand the heart-wrenching feeling anymore. He couldn't bear to listen to her blood-curdling screams and finally left. Yifeng thought that he would feel better as long as he didn't hear anything. As long as he didn't hear anything, his heart wouldn't hurt so much. However, he did not expect that after leaving, he would feel even more flustered and confused. No matter what he did, he could not continue to do it. He could only drink until he was drunk again. He told himself that as long as he was drunk and woke up, everything would be over. He was indeed drunk and slept. He even had a nightmare. In his dream, Yi was looking at him blankly with blood all over her body. He was scared awake by the nightmare. When he was about to get up, he received bad news. Yi didn't make it. She couldn't make it. Yifeng felt as if he was struck by lightning. He stumbled to the high priestess room and saw Yiyu, who was covered in blood and barely breathing. Chapter 658. Yiyu had already lost her consciousness. Yifeng held her in his arms and tried his best to transfer his psychokinesis into her body. He wanted to save her life, but no matter what he did, it was to no avail. This surgery was meant to be a success or death. In the end, Yiyu died in his arms. When she was half unconscious, she kept repeating the same sentence. She said that she did not want to see this result. She wanted to become a human. She did not want to be sharkmen anymore. She did not want to return to the mermaid tribe anymore. At the moment of death, Yiyu had a momentary flash of consciousness. Her mind was clear for a few seconds. Her lifeless eyes looked at Yifeng, who was holding her. The last sentence she left him was, "Yifeng, I hate you. I do not want to be your sister anymore." When he said this, Yifeng's voice trembled again. The bonfire next to them crackled. What happened after that? This was a tragic story. Ning Shuema felt sad when she heard it. Although sharkmen have a long life, once they die, they will truly die. They will not be reincarnated. I knew that Yiyu's only wish before she died was to be a human, so I used a forbidden technique to keep her soul. I sent her into reincarnation so that she could truly be a human. Yifeng's voice finally calmed down. Ning Shuema looked at him. What price did you pay for using the forbidden technique? She believed that Yifeng must have paid a heavy price. Yifeng's voice was calm. He did not want to talk about this. No matter the price, it is not as important as her final wish. Yiyu reincarnated into Yanzian. Then, did the person she originally liked reincarnate into Guzian? Ning Shuema asked the key question. It's him. Yifeng's voice was bitter. Whether it was in the previous life or this life, she was obsessed with him. Ning Shuema suddenly realized something was wrong. That's not right. If Guzian is the reincarnation of that man, then he should be younger than Yanziyuan, right? But as far as I know, Guzian is 8 years older than her. Could it be that Guzian died before Yiyu in his previous life? Yifeng shook his head slightly. Miss Ning, you may not know this, but Yiyu was forced to reincarnate by me using a forbidden technique. Her soul was incomplete after she died, and by the time I finished her soul and sent her to reincarnate, it was already 100 years after that incident. Guzian's previous life was a natural death. He only passed away 90 years after Yiyu's death, and he was 110 years old when he died. Ning Shuema glanced at him. You seem to know a lot about him. Yifeng did not hide anything. I found out about this later. After Yiyu's death, I was unwilling to accept it. After being dispirited for a while, I also went ashore and tried to find that man. I thought that since Yiyu was in love with him and died for him, I should at least tell him. Chapter 659. Yifeng's voice dimmed. However, Ning Shuema kept feeling that something was not quite right, but she could not put her finger on it. She paused and asked, "What did that man say when you found him?" Yifeng's voice sounded distant. He was very sad when he heard about Yiyu's death. But he refused to admit that Yiyu died for him. He talked nonsense, saying that Yiyu had someone else in her heart. I hated him for not daring to admit what he did. He made Yiyu suffer, so I beat him up. That bastard did not fight back at that time. The more I beat him, the more he laughed. In the end, he said that the person in Yiyu's heart was actually me. He also said that she wanted to go back to the sea to find me, not to become a human. Ningxuama. She pondered for a moment. Have you considered that what that man said might be true? Yiyu actually liked you? But she did not see her own heart clearly at that time. Yifeng was stunned and shook his head firmly. Impossible. If she loved me, why would she hurt me and leave with that man? Why would she risk her life to become a human? Why would she fall in love with that man in this life? Ningxuama sighed. Haven't you heard that a woman's heart is like a needle at the bottom of the sea? A woman's heart is the most difficult to guess. She thought for a moment and suddenly said, Did you know that she was not your biological sister when she was alive? Yifeng was stunned and frowned. She should have known? What do you mean by should have? Did you tell her that clearly? Did you tell her that you picked her up? Yifeng paused for a moment and shook his head slowly. No. I was afraid that I would hurt her, so I did not tell her about it. Ningxuama. She tilted her head and thought for a moment. Then she looked at Yifeng with a complicated look. She wanted to say something, but she did not say it in the end. A question flashed through her mind. Was it possible that Yiyu had always thought that Yifeng was her biological brother? But when she found out that she had feelings that she shouldn't have for her biological brother, she was shocked and desperately tried to find someone else to entrust her feelings to? Coincidentally, that man had arrived, and he had that charming temperament that made Yiyu think that he was her Prince Charming. Therefore, she left with that man without hesitation. However, after they got ashore, the more time she spent with that man, the more she missed her brother. She unintentionally revealed these traces in certain places. That man's family didn't allow Yiyu to become the official wife. Perhaps this was exactly what she wanted. She took the opportunity to return to the sea and look for her brother. However, she found out that her brother was already engaged to another woman. She was heartbroken and despaired. She was also embarrassed. Perhaps the Sharkmen clan had really become a sad place for her. That was why she decided to change into another person and end everything once and for all. She did not expect that the operation would fail. She was tortured for 2 days in vain and finally died an unnatural death. If her relationship with Yifeng was just a normal sibling relationship, then she was the one who had wronged Yifeng first. Moreover, she was the one who requested to change into another person. Even if the operation failed, she should be grateful to him and not hate him. Listening to her last words, she obviously hated him. Of course, these were all Ningxuama's guesses. As for the truth, only Yiyu probably knew about it. It was a pity that Yiyu was dead, and Yan Ziyuan did not have the memory of being Yiyu. Therefore, what happened back then would probably remain a mystery forever. She looked at Yifeng again. Yifeng looked up at the starry sky in the distance. He looked a little lonely. Chapter 660. Yifeng, what do you plan to do in the future? After this encounter, Yifeng had remained in his mermaid form. He must have been severely injured, causing him to be unable to maintain his human form. In this state, it was impossible for him to stay by Yan Ziyuan's side. Yifeng lowered his eyes and didn't say anything. She was about to marry the man she loved, so she didn't need him to stay by her side any longer, right? And where do you plan to go? Go where? Ningxuama's cat eyes narrowed. With that forbidden technique, she could no longer return to the mermaid clan. She could only wander about. The atmosphere was a bit heavy. Ningxuama decided to change the topic. Yifeng, what about your fiancée? Will you go back and reunite with her this time? Yifeng shook his head. After Yiyu died, I had no intention of marrying, so I cancelled the engagement. She should have married someone else. While the two of them were talking, the fish were finished as well. Miss Ning, after you escaped this time Do you know of Carefree Island? Yifeng seemed a bit confused. Carefree Island? Is it an island? Ningxuama nodded. It is an island. The island master is Rong Yuishenlin. She should be an immortal doctor, and her appearance-changing technique is quite good. There are tropical plants growing all over the island such as coconut trees. There is also a large tree whose leaves are golden and hexagonal. She tried her best to describe the plants on the island, hoping that Yifeng would say he recognized them. Her soul was imprisoned in this cat's body. According to Yi Qinghuan, she couldn't use suicide to escape. Otherwise, her soul would scatter. Yi Qinghuan might not be speaking the truth. Perhaps she was only trying to scare her, but she couldn't help but be on guard. She hadn't lived long enough. She didn't want to die like this. Yi Qinghuan's technique was simply too wicked. Moreover, with her current cultivation, she was indeed able to do so. She feared that an ordinary person wouldn't be able to solve this technique. She could only ask the immortal Rong Yuishenlin for help. If Rong Yuishenlin also didn't have any methods, she could only ask Great God Han for help. Moreover, Ning Xuema's original body was still at Carefree Island. Thus, no matter what, she had to make a trip there. Which sea is this island in? Yifeng asked. He had been wandering the world for a long time and was very familiar with the layout of this continent, but he had never heard of such an island, nor had he heard of Rongyue Tianlan. In this world, the continent was a single piece of land surrounded by oceans. The ocean covered the largest area. No one knew how big the ocean was. Even the shark men Yifeng didn't know. Ning Xuema felt that the map of this world was rather similar to that of Earth. In ancient times, the continents were a single piece. Later, with the changes in the Earth's crust, the continents drifted apart because it was surrounded by the ocean, but the name was different. For example, the Rakshasa Sea to the south, the Netherworld Sea to the north, the Floating Dream Sea to the east, and the Sunset Sea to the west. Yifeng's mermaid clan was located in the southern Rakshasa Sea. He was still very familiar with the Rakshasa Sea and was very familiar with the islands inside. But he had never heard of Carefree Island. As for the island plants that Ning Xuema described, they seemed to only exist on the islands of the Rakshasa. Ning Xuema was surprised by his question. When she went to Carefree Island, it was Han Shangyue who had brought her there. At that time, she had slept in the carriage for a long time before arriving at a seaside. How could she have seen what kind of sea it was? However, she finally remembered the small city that she had stayed in at the time. She had started from that small city and walked for about a day before arriving at the seaside. This sea shouldn't be too far from that small city. Chapter 661. Ning Xuema told him the name of the small city. Yifeng actually knew the name of the small city. He was surprised. That small city is an inland city. It's 2,000 miles away from the nearest sea. You actually managed to get there in a single day? 2,000 miles. Princess Mingwan's carriage was pulled by horses that were 1 in a million. But to travel 2,000 miles in a single day was still a fantasy. It was simply impossible. Moreover, when she was sitting in the carriage, she didn't feel any bumps. The only possibility was that Han Shangyue had secretly done something to the carriage so that no one noticed. No, that carriage boy seemed to have noticed something. Ning Xuemo remembered that when she got off the carriage, she saw that the boy's expression was a bit strange. It was just that she was in a hurry to go to Carefree Island, so she didn't pay too much attention to his expression. That carriage boy was Princess Mingwan's servant after all. His ability to remain calm wasn't ordinary, so his surprise wasn't obvious. If Han Shangyue had used some sort of technique along the way, then she really wouldn't know which sea it was. Then let's go to the beach closest to the small city, Ning Xuema said. She could only choose to try her luck. She looked at Yifeng. How far is that place from here? Yifeng raised his hand and rubbed between his eyebrows. About 8,000 miles. Ning Xuema. Her soul had actually floated so far away. She was about to say something when the sound of flapping wings came from the sky. There was no lack of birds in the mountains, but this sound was obviously that of a large bird of prey. Moreover, there were 4 or 5 of them together. Ning Xuema's heart sank. She looked up and saw several large birds flying towards them from the distance. There were people sitting on the backs of the birds, and there was a cold glint in their eyes. Yifeng's eyes were sharp. He saw the clothes of the people sitting on the backs of the birds. Bright reverence. Pursuers. He didn't think that even though they had escaped so far away, Yi Qinghuan still didn't want to let them go. She had actually sent pursuers all the way here. Without hesitation, Yifeng picked up the cat and dived back into the water. There were so many forks and waterways and so many mazes, but Yi Qingyuan could still chase them all the way here. It seemed that she had some skills. What kind of tracking technique did she use? He must have used some kind of magical treasure or animal. Otherwise, she wouldn't have caught up so quickly. Yifeng, what's the fastest tracking species in the water? Ning Shuima asked. Only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. Yifeng pondered for a moment and immediately said, I'm afraid she has Wenxin fish. Ning Shuima stared at him with wide eyes. Yifeng took a deep breath and briefly explained the origin of the Wenxin fish to her. This was a type of fish that was comparable to hunting dogs. They were best at tracking in the water. They could determine the size of the object they were tracking based on the aura in the water. Therefore, when encountering them, any illusion would be useless. However, this type of fish was extremely rare. Even Yifeng, as the king of the marine species, had never gotten his hands on one before. Someone once speculated that this fish had gone extinct, but he didn't expect Yi Qingyuan to have one. This was beyond Yifeng's expectation. What's their weakness? Are they afraid of poison? Yifeng smiled bitterly. No, they are not afraid of any poison. Ning Shuima couldn't think of a way to avoid being tracked by this fish. Moreover, that fish was most likely beside Yi Qingyuan. She couldn't assassinate that fish. Chapter 662. Yifeng hugged the cat and ran along the waterway towards the direction of Carefree Island. Carefree Island. Inside the cleansing room, the mud was still tumbling, and the mud shell was still moving up and down. Rong Yuishinlin stood at the entrance of the hall, staring at the enchantment that had sealed Ning Shuima's soul. How could this be? How could this be? He had set up this enchantment to trap souls. Even the most powerful ghost in the world wouldn't be able to break it. Ning Shuima was only an ordinary person. How could her soul have escaped? 6 hours ago, he had received news that Ning Shuima had come to visit. Since Ning Shuima was fine, he felt relieved and went out to greet her. Originally, he had wanted to settle Yunqi down and then return to guard her. However, he hadn't expected that Yunqi had suffered a qi deviation while cultivating. She had been seriously injured and had struggled to find him naturally. He couldn't ignore the life and death of his good friend. He had no choice but to immediately heal her. This delay lasted for nearly 6 hours. After 6 hours, he had finally stabilized Yunqi's injuries. Just as he was about to go and see how Ning Shuima was doing, he saw Dizwa appear in his hall. Han Shangyue looked a little tired and his face was a little pale. When Yunqi saw him, her expression changed slightly. She stood up and bowed to him. Dizwa. Han Shangyue only nodded slightly. He didn't have any intention of talking to her. He directly asked Rong Yuishinlin, where is she? Rong Yuishinlin naturally knew who he was referring to. He sighed and briefly told him about how Ning Shuima's leg hadn't recovered. Of course, he also told him about his method. When he had told him about it, he had been immensely proud of himself. However, he didn't expect that Han Shanyue's expression would change before he could finish. He coldly said, nonsense. With a turn of his body, he disappeared, heading straight for his clean room. Rong Yuishinlin saw that his expression wasn't right and his heart skipped a beat. Although he didn't understand why Han Shanyue was so nervous, he faintly felt that something was wrong. He hurriedly followed behind. He didn't expect that when he opened the door and saw everything inside, he would be stunned. The mud shell that contained Ning Shuima's body was still rolling, but the soul that he had sealed was nowhere to be found. Han Shanyue was a man of action. When Rong Yutianlan arrived, he had already begun to use the spirit summoning spell to summon Ning Shuima's soul back. However, to his surprise, his soul summoning spell, which had always worked, did not work. After the spell was cast, he did not even manage to summon half of Ning Shuima's soul. There were only 3 reasons for this to happen. First, her soul had already dissipated. Secondly, her soul was attached to something else. Thirdly, she had already reincarnated. It was impossible for her to reincarnate in such a short period of time. She was a living soul, not a dead soul. It was impossible for the underworld to accept her. There were only 2 possibilities left. Han Shanyue's face was slightly pale. His eyes stared at Rong Yuishenlin, who was still in a state of shock. He didn't speak for a long time. Rong Yuishenlin was frightened by his stare. He took a deep breath and said, Dizwa, I am also very surprised that this happened. I clearly sealed her in the force field. How did it disappear? It was impossible. It was really impossible. It was too strange. When did Yunqi arrive? Han Shangyue suddenly asked. Rong Yuishenlin's expression changed slightly. He naturally understood what Han Shangyue was suspecting. Dizwa, Yunqi arrived 6 hours ago. Chapter 663. Yunqi was seriously injured because of qi deviation. Since I met her, I have been treating her injuries. She has never left my sight, Rong Yuishenlin continued. In other words, the possibility of Yunqi secretly attacking them had been eliminated. Han Shangyue nodded slightly. At this time, Han Shangyue was not afraid of offending people. He wanted to investigate all possibilities in order to find Ning Xuema's soul in the shortest time possible. The longer this went on, the more disadvantageous it would be for her. Rong Yuishenlin, did anyone else come to your island in the past 6 hours? Rong Yuishenlin shook his head. No, only Yunqi. Of course he could sense his own island. Not to mention one more person, even if there was one more mouse on this island he could sense it. This eliminated all external factors. It seemed like Ning Xuema had broken the force field and left for some unknown reason. That brat. Couldn't she just leave him alone and not worry about her? Tell me the details of what happened. Don't leave anything out. Han Shangyue said. This was not the time to find fault with anyone. The most important thing was to find her soul. He and Rong Yuishenlin had known each other for thousands of years, so he knew his temper well. He wouldn't harm Ning Xuema for Yunqi's sake and scatter that girl's soul. As for Ning Xuema, she was an expert at breaking barriers. He didn't expect that she would be restless even in her soul state. Rong Yuishenlin did not delay and immediately told him everything that had happened after Ning Xuema ran out to find him. In the end he said, Dizwa, I know this method is very dangerous, but Miss Ning insisted on recovering her legs. I had no choice. I tried to contact Dizwa but I could not reach him. Rong Yuetian also felt a little bitter in his heart. Who did he offend? He had good intentions but he did not expect this to happen. Moreover, Dizwa did not tell him the whole story and ran away. He did not even mention his whereabouts so he could not contact him. Miss Ning might be angry with him. He coughed and said, Dizwa, forgive me for being nosy but you two are newlyweds. Early in the morning you left her behind without saying a word, so we couldn't contact you even if we wanted to. I saw that Miss Ning seemed to be a bit resentful. Will her soul disappear in a fit of anger and make you anxious? Han Shangyue paused. She's not as bored as you. She had resentment? I should be the one with resentment, right? He couldn't do anything on their wedding night. In order to restore her appearance, he even accepted Rong Yue Qianlan's wicked method and almost got seriously injured in the end. When that lass woke up, she still acted as if they were going their separate ways. She kept calling herself his shield and concubine. If he really treated her as a shield, he wouldn't have helped her so much. Moreover, he didn't need a shield. Ever since he had met Xuema, his peaceful life had been disrupted. Things kept happening, and he had never had a moment of peace. Because that girl's feet had been seriously injured once, she had used the Qilin armor to treat them and changed her original genes. Therefore, she could not use normal methods to recover them. Other parts of her body had been restored, but her legs had changed. He was also heartbroken when he saw it. After her disguise was removed, she slept soundly with drool dripping from her mouth. He did not sleep at all, but read medical books. Finally, he found out in a medical book that the soft armor flower of the morning and evening mountain could restore the body's elements changed by the Qilin armor. He wanted to wait until she woke up and realized that her feet were not right before telling her about it. Then, he told her to wait patiently while he went to the morning and evening mountain to get the herbs for her. Chapter 664. Han Shangyue didn't expect the little bastard to touch her body after she woke up. Her actions were so bold and shameless that it was an eye-opener for him. He simply didn't speak and didn't make a sound. He wanted to see where Ning Shuima's bottom line was. He was such a big living person lying next to her, but she actually ignored him. She only noticed him when she was about to get up. Seeing that she was afraid that he would touch her, he was so angry that he decided to just disappear. He knew that when Shuima found out that her feet were like that, she would be anxious and helpless. Then let her be anxious for a while. Consider it a punishment for her. Of course, he wouldn't really leave her alone. He recovered a little and went straight to Zhaoxi Mountain to pick some grass. Zhaoxi Mountain was a mountain in the demon realm. It wasn't in this world but in a barrier. Ferocious beasts and demons ran rampant there. Even with his skills, he had to be careful. In order to avoid alerting the demons in Zhaoxi Mountain, he turned off all the sound-transmitting spells on him. This was also the main reason why Rongjuishan couldn't contact him. What Han Shangyue didn't expect was that Rongjuishan actually had another way to heal Shuima's feet. He didn't expect this method to be so perverted, of course. He didn't expect such an accident to happen. Every soul moved based on their thoughts. However, after a normal soul left the body, it would be muddle-headed and wouldn't know where it was, let alone who it was. Of course, it wouldn't know what to do. This kind of soul would either stay in the same place after leaving the body or follow its own body. There were also some souls that couldn't support the shape and scattered. Very few souls with strong willpower would wander around, such as this troublesome girl. Where's that Kirin? Han Shanyue's tone was very bad. It's here. Kirin came in from outside the door and looked at Han Shanyue timidly. Where did you go just now? Why didn't you stay by her side? Han Shanyue's face was as calm as water. There were several times when Ning Shuima was in trouble because this unreliable Kirin wasn't by her side. Just now, Island Master Rongyue and my master were playing chess. I was bored, so I went to the lake to cultivate. Kirin stammered. The lake water here was full of spiritual energy, making it a good place for cultivation. Therefore, it went straight into the water to cultivate. It had lost track of time in there. By the time it was done and came out, Han Shanyue and the others were already there. This unreliable Kirin really needs to be taught a lesson. However, now is not the time to teach it a lesson. Quickly use your telepathy to sense your master and find out where she is, Han Shanyue ordered. As long as Ning Shuima was within a range of 1,000 miles, Kirin would be able to sense her. No matter what she foolishly possessed, it would be able to find her quickly and bring her back. Kirin's head drooped. I tried to sense it just now, but I couldn't. It was on the verge of tears. Han Shanyue was speechless. Her soul was already thousands of miles away. How did she run away? Could it be that she was cultivating the will soul? Wherever her will went, her soul would go there instantly. Han Shanyue lowered his eyes and thought for a moment. His fingers slowly clenched. He thought of the illusion Ning Shuima's will soul in the belly of the mountain spirit. Her willpower was indeed extraordinarily strong. Then, where did her soul go after breaking through this enchantment? Chapter 665. So where did Shuima's soul want to go after breaking through this enchantment? Could it be she wanted to go back to her era? No, her original body was still here. Logically speaking, her soul couldn't leave this world without a special reason. So where did she want to go? Kirin couldn't be contacted, which meant that she was thousands of miles away. Her soul could play chess with Rongyu and be on par with her, which meant that her mind wasn't in a mess. She should be very clear-headed. She wouldn't have lost her soul for no reason. So the disappearance of her soul could be dispelled. What was left was that she had possessed something else. But her willpower was so strong, and she knew that her body could be healed, so she shouldn't have thought of possessing something else. Even if she was curious and found a cat or a dog to possess, once she felt that something was wrong, she could immediately use suicide to escape. But now she couldn't come out, so she should be restrained by some kind of spell. There weren't many people on this continent who knew this kind of spell. They could be counted with one hand. Han Shanyue reached out and took out a golden talisman and opened the heavenly sound wall again. He was always straightforward when giving orders. Order the disciples to investigate the Heavenly Star Sect, Limitless Sect. Bright reverence. See if there are any movements from these sects in the past few hours. It had to be said that the Sun Moon Sect's disciples were very informative. After half an hour, there was finally a reply from the other side. Reporting to Ancestor 4 hours ago, there was a strange movement from the Bright Reverence cult. They seemed to be chasing after a mermaid and a cat. Even the leader of the Bright Reverence cult, Yi Qingyuan, personally went after them. The voice transmitted from the golden talisman was heard by everyone present. Rong Yutianlan was stunned, and looked at Han Shangyue with a complicated gaze. It can't be? Bright Reverence is more than 8,000 miles away from here. Miss Ning's soul can float there? Maybe it's just a coincidence. Han Shangyue was expressionless. He stood there for a moment, then suddenly raised his hand, and a white light appeared around him. When the white light dissipated, his entire appearance had changed. She wore a loose white robe that fluttered in the wind. Her fine black hair fell to her ankles like a waterfall. Her face was covered with a cold jade mask, and a sparkling sapphire hung on her forehead. He stood there like a god who had descended to the mortal world. Kiran stared blankly. Ancestor. Han Shangyue glanced at it. He did not expect it to have seen his true appearance. However, it wasn't strange. In this continent, his signature clothes were almost always the symbol of the venerable emperor. Kiran might have heard of it before, which was why he could recognize it immediately. Looks like this little guy's IQ isn't that low after all. Before he could finish his thought, Kiran had already spoken. Great God, you actually want to impersonate Di Zun? Wouldn't it be easier to save my master by impersonating him? Han Shangyue. He was too lazy to talk nonsense with the little Qilin. He raised his hand, and a white light enveloped the little Qilin. The little Qilin cried out in alarm, and after the white light dispersed, an angry blue cat was standing on the ground. The little Qilin was simply furious. When it wanted to turn into a cat, Han Shangyue disliked it so much that it didn't dare to appear in front of him in its cat form. What was wrong with him now? He actually turned it into a cat. It angrily wanted to change back, but after a while it was useless. It was shocked. Hey, great God, Han, what are you doing? He won't turn me into a cat forever, right? Chapter 666. Han Shangyue waved his sleeves and picked up the blue cat. Come with me. After another gust of wind, Han Shangyue was nowhere to be seen. Rongyi Yuishinlin was speechless. Dizwa had broken the precepts. The emperor had exposed his true identity in front of Kiran. Dizwa had even used the instant travel technique. This technique wasn't something that could be mastered by people on this continent. If outsiders found out, it would cause a huge commotion. Dizwa was really nervous about Miss Ning. He suddenly sensed something and turned his head to look at the entrance of the hall. He saw Yunqi standing there. Her face was pale and her eyes were blank as she stood there in a daze. The wind blew her clothes and made her flutter. She was so weak that it seemed like a gust of wind could blow her away. Yunqi, your body isn't well. Why are you here instead of meditating in the front hall? Rongyi Yuishinlin's heart sank when he saw her expression. He walked over to her. He really cares about her, doesn't he? Yunqi's voice was a little shaky. Rongyi Yuishinlin sighed. He paused and finally said, Yunqi, I think you should give up. Give up? Yunqi repeated mechanically. Her voice suddenly rose. Why should I? Why should I give up? I've been waiting for him for thousands of years. Why should that woman? She's just a mortal. Her voice was shrill. How can I not compare to her? Why can't he see me? Among all the women around him, I'm the most special to him. This was the first time she'd screamed without caring about her image. Her face was green and white. Rongyi Yuishinlin frowned. His figure flashed and he appeared in front of Yunqi. He tapped her shoulder with the tip of his fan. Yunqi's body swayed and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Rongyi Yuishinlin heaved a sigh of relief and helped her sit down on a chair. Yunqi, you almost went berserk again. If he hadn't intervened in time, Yunqi's recuperated meridians would have gone astray again. Yunqi was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, tears streamed down her face. Rongyi Yuishinlin, what should I do? Rongyi Yuishinlin sighed. His answer was straightforward. You should let go. Feelings can't be forced. Let go? How could this be? I've waited for him for thousands of years. Yunqi, if he is heartless towards you, what's the point of waiting for him for 10,000 years? Feelings were not determined by the number of years they had known each other. Yunxi, if you continue to be stubborn, I'm afraid you'll be the one getting hurt in the end. But I can't accept it. I'm obviously better than that woman in every way. Yunxi's gaze fell on the mud shell that was still rolling in the mud. Rong Yuetian gently closed her fan and said, when it comes to love, it doesn't have to be a match. If it was all about matching in social status and skills, then how could there be so many infatuated men and resentful women and beautiful love stories in this world? But this woman really doesn't deserve him. She's just an ordinary person with a few hundred years of life at most. Yunxi was unconvinced. Rongyi Yuishenlin frowned. Yunxi, all living things are equal. You have already attained the Tao. Such words shouldn't come out of your mouth. Yunxi bit her lip. But, no buts. Rong Yuetian interrupted her. There was a hint of seriousness in her watery eyes. Even if there was something going on, they wouldn't tell you, right? Kiran said with a knowing look. Han Shangyue glanced at the Kiran and began to consider the possibility of throwing this 8 trigrams Kiran out. He suddenly thought of something. Did your master say that? With Kiran's intelligence, it shouldn't have thought so much. And it also shouldn't know so much. Kiran had been with Ning Shuima for the longest time, so it was most likely that Ning Shuima, that little bastard, made this up. Kiran looked at him with shining eyes. Great God, you're really smart. Sure enough. He guessed right. Chapter 668. That girl didn't have much contact with his true self, but she began to pay attention to his gossip. Was she interested in his true self? Han Shanyue's eyes flashed. What did your master say? Hey, it's rare for the great god to ask about gossip. Kiran immediately cheered up. My master said that the ancestor and his disciple most likely had a passionate relationship. Yi Qinghuan liked him and he also liked Yi Qinghuan. However, due to their master and disciple status, this kind of taboo love was not appreciated by the common people. The master and disciple went through some hardships, and the ancestor reluctantly cut off their relationship and banished his female disciple. The female disciple sadly left and established the Bright Reverence sect. Bright Reverence, isn't that the combination of the sun and the moon? Only she still considered herself as the ancestor's disciple. After the ancestor banished her, he secretly promised that Yi Qinghuan would be his only female disciple, and that he would not accept a second one. Although the master and disciple did not meet, in their hearts, they recognized each other as the one and only. It's sad and beautiful, right? Han Shangyue. Sad and beautiful? It's more like a bastard. With his temperament, if he really likes someone, why would he care about the taboo love between master and disciple? Why would he make himself so miserable? To him, all rules and regulations were fleeting clouds. That girl was simply too much of a bastard. She randomly made up stories about him. Did she say all this? Han Shanyue's voice was cold. My master explained it to me, Kiran explained. In fact, it still remembered Ning Shuima's words. It was just that a few days ago, Ning Shuima was very bored and told it a story. Somehow, the topic was brought up to the ancestor and Yi Qinghuan. Ning Shuima just casually said, the relationship between the master and disciple is not simple. At that time, Kiran asked why. Ning Shuima smiled and said, I've only heard of a master-disciple relationship. I didn't expect to see a real-life version of it in this world. The little Qilin was not ashamed to ask questions. It immediately asked about the relationship between a master and a disciple. Ning Shuima explained to it about the romance between a master and a disciple that she had read in her era. She told it about quite a few novels and each one of them was filled with passion and emotion. She was just speaking casually. Kiran was, after all, still young and ignorant of these matters. It was just listening to her. After hearing about it, he had pretty much forgotten about it. Now that Han Shanyue mentioned it, it summarized Ning Shuima's story into the story of Di Zun and Yi Qinghuan with a deep expression. Your master really has a lot of free time. Han Shanyue's voice was cold. No wonder that lass said that master-disciple relationship was the most annoying thing in front of him. It turned out that she had a preconceived impression of it. My master is not free. It's just that her deductive ability is very strong. What she deduces can't be wrong. Di-Zun and his apprentice must be in a master-disciple relationship, Kiran concluded. Han Shanhua's lips curled up coldly. Since that last said that he was in a master-disciple relationship, perhaps he should make it true. Let her have a taste of it herself. He really should take in another female apprentice. Originally, because of the shadow of Yi Qingwan, he was afraid that he would encounter similar troubles again. Therefore, he did not take in any female apprentices. He did not expect that Ning Shuima would make up such a melodramatic drama for him. Great God, Han! Kiran was about to say something else, but it was interrupted by Han Shanhua. Call him Di-Zun. Chapter 669. Alright, Di-Zun is Di-Zun. Di-Zun, how do you think my master went to Yi Qingwan's place? Han Shanhua was speechless. How would you know? He also wanted to know the answer to this question. Could it be that the girl was very interested in him and misunderstood that he had feelings for Yi Qingwan, so she wanted to take a look? Stop talking nonsense. Pay more attention to your master. We have now covered more than half of the distance. She is escaping again. If you can sense her, we will be really close. Okay. Kiran nodded and used his telepathy to call Ning Shuima again and again. Over there. Over there. Ah, she dived into the water again. Quick. Quick, report it to the leader. It seemed that Yi Qingwan really hated Ning Shuima to the extreme. All the disciples of the Bright Reverence sect were actually chasing after her. Because of the tracking of the letter fish, they were able to determine the general route that Ning Shuima and Yifeng escaped. Therefore, they rode all kinds of big birds in the air and looked down on the ground. It was almost a carpet search. Therefore, when Yifeng brought Ning Shuima to the surface of the water to change the air bubbles, they would occasionally be discovered by them. Then they would quickly inform Yi Qingwan, who was following them underground through the voice transmission talisman. With this guidance, Yi Qingwan naturally got closer and closer. After all, Yifeng was once the leader of the Sharkmen and was also a secret guard. He was naturally sensitive to danger. Although he had not met Yi Qingwan yet, he had already accurately grasped the danger. Ning Shuima was also a secret agent, so she was naturally very sensitive to danger. She could not sense the outside world in the air bubble, but she could feel Yifeng's nervousness. Is she about to catch up? Ning Shuima asked. Yes, about a few dozen miles of water. With Yi Qingwan's martial arts, she could reach here in a few minutes. At this speed, Yi Qingwan would be able to catch up with them in about an hour. Once they caught up to him, he would be doomed. Yifeng would be skinned alive, and Ning Shuima's soul would probably be torn into 8 pieces by Yi Qingwan. If an ordinary warrior were to encounter such a situation, they would have been scared out of their wits. They would either run around like headless flies, or they would not be able to bear the psychological pressure and fight to the death with the other party. Even if they knew that they were no match for the other party, they would die a quick death. However, Yifeng was different. Years of living on the edge of a knife and blood had trained his mental fortitude to be extraordinarily strong. He was already seriously injured, and after being tortured by Yi Qingwan for so long, his physical strength was less than half of his original. Now that they had been on the run for so long, they were exhausted. Even so, his expression remained calm, and he didn't seem to panic at all during his escape. Although Ning Shuima was in the bubble, she was still in his arms, so she could feel his steady heartbeat. Yifeng was really a talent. It was a pity that Yanxian only had Guzian in her eyes. Her feelings were all on Guzian, but she always neglected the lover who was silently accompanying her. Love was like this. You put in a lot, but you might not get what you want. Others might not necessarily respond to you. She shook her head. Now was not the time to think about love. It was more important to escape. Escaping like this was not a solution. She had to think of another way. There was another fork in the road. Ning Shuima's heart couldn't help but move. She hated Yifeng and Ning Shuima so much that her hair stood on end. If curses could kill, Yifeng and Ning Shuima would have been cursed to death by her many times. She walked back for more than 200 miles before she smelled Yifeng's scent again. As a result, time was delayed even further. In addition, the auras of the waterways Yifeng had traveled were similar. He had brought Ning Shuima along with him. Once they had retraced their steps, their auras were almost the same. It would be difficult for the Wenxin fish to distinguish between the two. It couldn't judge by the size of the aura of the person it was tracking. It also had to calculate which path had the freshest aura to determine where they had gone. However, Yifeng and the others were very fast. The freshness of the auras on these paths was not much different. It had to use all of its tactile abilities to analyze and judge. As a result, not only did the Wenxin fish consume a lot of energy, it also slowed down significantly. Chapter 671. The distance between them increased again. Yi Qinghuan was so angry that she wanted to stomp her feet. Seeing that her precious fish was getting more and more tired and weak, she was angry and anxious, but she could not think of a solution. Those two people were very cunning. Often, after entering a fork in the road, they would go back the way they came from. The path they took was like a maze, making her feel dizzy. Even worse, their way of walking made it impossible for Yi Qinghuan to put away the Wenxin fish. She could only let the fish lead the way. The Wenxin fish also had a physical limit. It was getting weaker and weaker, and its analysis of breath was getting slower and slower. Being led by the nose like this was not a solution. Yi Qinghuan's eyes flashed fiercely. She had to make another move. Today, if she did not catch the mermaid and the cat and tear them into pieces, her name Yi Qinghuan would be written upside down. She immediately contacted the disciples outside and asked them to bring the treasure of the sect, the Tianji network. This kind of running consumed a lot of energy. Yifeng also used up a lot of energy. His dark blue scales were slightly white, which was a sign that he was about to reach his limit. But fortunately, he could sense that Yi Qinghuan was getting further and further away from him. Ning Shuima's maze was obviously making the woman suffer. Yifeng was so tired that the tip of his tail was numb, but he still gritted his teeth and persisted. He was a member of the water clan, so he naturally knew the characteristics of the Wenxin fish. He knew that chasing the Wenxin fish like this would be tiring at this speed. If he persisted for another 2 hours, the Wenxin fish would most likely be completely destroyed. Only when the Wenxin fish was truly destroyed, Yi Qinghuan would have lost her tracking eyes. He had to carry Ning Shuima and run forward. Only then could he truly shake her off and escape with his life. He looked down at Ning Shuima in his arms, and a touch of admiration flashed through his eyes. Ning Shuima was the one who came up with these ideas during the escape. All of these methods were absolutely effective. She was just a teenage girl, but she was actually more experienced than him, a merman who had been through a lot. Those tricks were too much for him to take in. This girl was definitely different. Even the old foxes in Jianghu did not have as many ideas as her. Was she really the rumored young miss of the Marquise estate who never left her home? It was impossible for someone who had not experienced too many life and death situations to have such precise judgment and battle experience. Because the distance between them had increased again, Yifeng was finally able to calm down a little and slow down a little. "Miss Ning, do you have another identity?" Yifeng asked. Ning Shuima was calculating the general distance between her and Yi Qinghuan, and the consumption speed of the Wenxin fish. Hearing his question, she answered absent-mindedly. Have you ever been a scout, assassin, or secret guard? If she had done any of these, she would definitely be one of the best. Yifeng wasn't simple. He actually saw through her true identity. Although Ning Shuima and Yifeng had not known each other for a long time, she already knew his temperament and knew that he was a chivalrous person. This kind of person was a good friend to have. Ning Shuima did not want to hide anything from him, so she told him about her previous life's identity. Of course, because of time constraints, she was very brief. Even so, it was enough to shock Yifeng. So she had reincarnated in someone else's body. He was very knowledgeable and naturally knew what reincarnating in someone else's body was. Chapter 672. In fact, it was not easy to succeed in reincarnation. Every body corresponded to a soul, and the body was like a container for the soul. Only one's own body was the most suitable one. When borrowing someone else's body, the body and soul were mostly incompatible. It was actually very risky for the soul to reincarnate. If it failed, the soul would scatter. Even if one could successfully reincarnate, the soul would feel very uncomfortable in the borrowed body, and it would not be easy to command the body. Often its movements would be stiff like a jumping zombie. There were also very few souls that had strong adaptability and could command the body as they wished. But after all, compared to their original body, their lifespan would be greatly shortened. This was also the main reason why the souls that Yi Qinghuan made for this cat could age so quickly. Although Yi Qinghuan had used a spell on the cat to allow all kinds of souls to enter and adapt to it, Yi Qinghuan was still unable to do so. But it was very harmful to those souls. Often, the soul of a young girl would become the soul of a 70 or 80-year-old woman after 10 years or so. The power of the soul would be almost completely absorbed by this cat's body. Yi Feng had seen Ning Xuema's original appearance before, and her movements were not ordinary, and she did not have the slightest sluggishness of a reincarnated soul. If Ning Xuema did not say it herself, Yi Feng might not be able to guess it even if he guessed for 1,000 years. Reincarnation was an extremely confidential matter, and even one's own relatives might not know about it. He did not expect Ning Xuema to say it to him without hesitation. Yi Feng was surprised, but he was also touched. He was touched by her trust in him. He was touched by her unreserved trust in him. A gentleman would die for his bosom friend. Although he did not show anything on the surface, he had already made up his mind. Even if he had to risk his life, he would protect Ning Xuema thoroughly. Originally, when he heard that Yan Ziyuan was going to get married in half a month, he was in despair and felt that there was nothing left to live for. His desire to live was not strong. If he did not have Ning Xuema by his side, perhaps he would have turned back and directly fought Yi Qinghuan. But for the sake of Ning Xuema, he had to persevere. Originally, he was exhausted to the extreme. But now his body seemed to have been injected with new vitality, lifting his spirits. According to Ning Xuema's guidance, he took various forks in the road and set up various puzzles. In order to confuse Yi Qinghuan at this moment, the two of them could only frequently backtrack and circle around various waterways. Since Ning Xuema needed to change her bubble from time to time, the two of them would occasionally come across Bright Reverence cult's disciples. This was something that could not be helped. Once they met, Yi Feng would have to speed up when he entered the waterway again. Otherwise, Yi Qinghuan would quickly catch up. If Yi Qinghuan did not use various magic weapons, Ning Xuema's method was indeed a good way to avoid being tracked. Even if Yi Qinghuan chased her for another 2 days, she might not be able to catch her. While the two of them were running, Ning Xuema's heart suddenly skipped a beat. Kiran's voice suddenly sounded from the bottom of her heart. Master! Master, where are you? Ning Xuema's eyes brightened. Little Apple. She had actually managed to contact Kiran again. Could it be that she had accidentally run into the vicinity of Carefree Island? Kiran nearly jumped up and clawed at the ancestor's hand. It happily shouted, I can hear Master's voice. Ha ha ha, I've contacted Master. Chapter 673. The ancestor's foot slightly paused, and his fingers suddenly stiffened, causing the little Qilin to cry out in pain, Hey, be gentle, you're hurting me. The sovereign's fingers loosened. He asked in a low voice, what did she say? Kiran was still excitedly chatting with Ning Xuema. As it heard the sovereign's question, it subconsciously replied, Master told me to hurry to Carefree Island and ask for reinforcements. She said that Yi Qinghuan had turned her into a cat and was being chased around like a rat. She told me to hurry and ask for reinforcements. This girl wasn't stupid. She knew that she couldn't deal with her. Who did she ask you to look for? That girl should have remembered him by now, right? She should know that he was her only protective umbrella, right? She told me to look for Island Master Rongyue. She said that Island Master Rongyue might be able to stop Yi Qinghuan's crazy behavior. She said that Yi Qinghuan had entered a nearly insane state, and that she couldn't afford to offend her. Kiran was almost repeating Ning Xuema's words. The ancestor's footsteps paused again. His inky black eyes flashed with an icy cold light. In her time of crisis, the only person she thought of was an outsider like Rongyue Tianlan. She had thrown her cheap husband to the side, It seemed that she was truly ruthless towards him. That appearance of going back to the bridge and going back to the road wasn't an act, but a portrayal of her true state of mind. She really didn't care about him. She might even hate him. Then why was he still trying so hard to find her? A woman without a heart. Had he been too attentive to her? Kiran was desperately chatting with Ning Xuema. It didn't notice that the sovereign's footsteps had slowed down. Sovereign, I asked her where she was. She said she was near 6 Branches Mountain. How far is that from here? Will we be able to get there in time? 960 miles. The sovereign spat out a few words. He lightly said, tell her to hold on for 6 more hours. Rongyue Tianlan will rush over to save her. Kiran agreed. After it reacted, its eyes widened. Sovereign, you're not going to save her. Where are you going? It had already noticed that the ancestor had started to turn back. I'll send you back to Carefree Island to call for reinforcements. The sovereign finally decided on something and turned to leave. Kiran turned pale with fright. Ancestor. My master is very, very dangerous. You can't just stand by and watch us die. Before it could finish its words, the ancestor had already sealed its mute acupoint. It could only stare blankly, unable to speak. Leave him to die? He had lived for so many years. When had he ever saved someone who was about to die? Normally, he did not care about the affairs of the world. As Han Shanyue roamed the continent, it was inevitable that he would encounter some injustice and see some people being hunted down. Those people had desperately begged him for help. When had he ever reached out to help? Life and death were fated. He just had to ensure that the world situation did not deviate too much, and that the demons did not run amok. The life and death of other people were nothing more than passing clouds to him. He didn't care about it at all. It was the first time in thousands of years that he had repeatedly broken his vows for a woman. He had already done all he could for this woman and had a clear conscience. Since she didn't care about him, then let her be. Moreover, she might not necessarily die. Although Yi Qingwan was extreme in her actions, she had a bottom line. She would not harm others' lives in vain. Besides, she was very fond of that cat, so she wouldn't really do anything to that girl. At most, she would be locked up for a while and let her suffer a little. Chapter 674. It was time for that girl to suffer. When the ancestor came here, he had used the instant 1,000-mile distance technique and the ground shrinking technique. It only took him a little more than 2 hours to travel more than 6,000 miles. Now, he was going back using the cloud traversing technique. Although he was still as fast as lightning, his speed was much slower than before. Kiran opened his eyes wide. He wanted to say something, but he couldn't. The moment Ning Xuema contacted the little Qilin, she was extremely excited. She didn't know that the ancestor had brought the little Qilin to chase after her. And the little Qilin didn't have the time to tell her. She was a straightforward person and immediately reported her location. In fact, Han Shanyue had wronged her. It wasn't that she couldn't remember him at this time, but she thought that he was running away. She thought that only Rongyue Tianlan was with Kiran, so she immediately told Kiran to ask Rongyue Tianlan to come and save her. She didn't know that her inadvertent wrong order cut off the rescue team, and she had to pay the price. In fact, Kiran told her that Han Shanyue was coming to save her through telepathy. Ning Xuema felt warm in her heart. She was about to ask Kiran where they were now and how long it would take for them to arrive, but her communication with Kiran was suddenly cut off again. She was shocked again and tried to contact him again, but there was no reply. She didn't know that Han Shanyue was very fast. Once he stepped on the return journey, he would be more than 1,000 miles away. Naturally, she couldn't contact Kiran. She was a little uneasy when she couldn't contact Kiran. However, since Great God Han had brought Kiran to find her and asked her to contact Kiran, he should be here soon, right? He should be less than 1,000 miles away from her. With his speed, he should be here in 2 hours at most. She just needed to hold on for 2 more hours. 2 more hours would be enough. It turned out that Great God Han didn't give up on her. He didn't leave her alone when he left without a word. Han Shanyue's face flashed in her mind, and a warm feeling emerged in her heart. He did care about her, didn't he? Ning Xuema thought about what she did that day. She felt that she had gone overboard. She probably hurt Han Shangyue a little. No wonder he left in a rage. Fortunately, he didn't give up on her. Now he brought Kieran to save her. He should care about her now. Otherwise, he wouldn't kiss her when she looked like an old lady. He was a clean freak. Usually, if someone touched him, he slapped them on the street. He should care about her, right? Kieran's heart, right? Humans were like that. Once they calmed down, they would be able to analyze the situation. She could consider things from the other's point of view. A lot of the Kieran the past was to Kieran. She was a secret agent, so she was very wary of people. Kieran, she couldn't fall asleep at all. That day, Han Shangyue slept with her on the same bed. But she didn't feel uncomfortable at all. She didn't even notice his existence at first. Chapter 675. This would have been impossible in the past. Usually, Ning Shuima would have noticed it even if there was an extra button on her bed, not to mention having another person on it. However, she didn't feel anything when Han Shangyue was by her side. Of course, this was because the Almighty was regulating his breathing well, but it was also because she had subconsciously let down her guard against him. Perhaps she didn't realize it herself, but her body had already gotten used to his presence. She felt at ease when she was by his side. Ning Shuimo recalled the kiss and the words he said after the kiss. At that time, he had a faint smile on his lips and said that she liked him. He said it with such certainty that she had subconsciously denied it in her panic. People who worked as secret agents were all suspicious and wouldn't easily express their true feelings. Especially when it came to feelings, love would make people blind. Once they fell in love, they would easily lose their ability to judge. For a qualified secret agent, falling in love was a big taboo. As a secret agent, they could flirt with handsome guys, call them brothers, and even have one-night stands. They could play around in the world of mortals. However, they were afraid of stepping into the trap of love. This was also the main reason why Ning Shuima had always misinterpreted Han Shangyue's feelings. Because subconsciously, she was repulsed and didn't dare to touch it. Moreover, Han Shangyue gave her the status of a concubine. If she didn't fall in love with him, she could ignore this status and even be his shield. However, once she fell in love, she would instinctively feel repulsed by this status. She would also feel that Han Shangyue didn't care about her at all. It was because of this mentality that she had repeatedly rejected Han Shangyue's love. She only used the status of a concubine to stab him and deal with him. Because of love, there was worry. Because of love, there was fear. It was because of love that she cared, felt conflicted, and subconsciously avoided it. Ning Shuima had also sorted out her thoughts for the past 2 days. She analyzed what had happened and how she felt. After calming down, she finally understood one thing. She really did care about him, and she really did like him. She didn't even know when she had fallen for him. After figuring it out, Ning Shuima once mocked herself in her heart. She thought she was smart, but she couldn't really understand her own feelings. She could see other people's moods and analyze other people's feelings, but when it came to herself, she couldn't see clearly. She even decided that once she returned to Carefree Island and returned to her own body, she would look for Han Shangyue and have a good chat with him. She would ask him just what he thought of her. She told him that she minded her identity as a concubine very much, and that she minded not telling him her real name. If they loved each other, they should have the most basic trust and respect. Before she could contact Kieran, Ning Shuima already had this idea. After she contacted Kieran and heard that Han Shangyue was coming, the little bit of grudge she had against him disappeared. In that split second, it was as if she had been injected with stimulants. Her cat eyes started to sparkle. More than 2 hours. More than 2 hours. In just a little more than 2 hours, she would be able to escape from this sea of suffering. She would be able to see him again. An hour passed. Another hour passed. Yifeng was running until he was almost crippled. As for the reinforcements that Ning Shuima had been waiting for, they still hadn't arrived. She hadn't even been able to contact Kieran. Chapter 676. What was going on? Did something happen to them? Couldn't be, right? With Han Shangyue's abilities, who could make him get into an accident? But why wasn't he here yet? Why couldn't they contact Kiran? What in the world happened? Even though Ning Shuima was smart, she didn't expect that Han Shanyue had already returned. She was still hoping that he would come. She was hoping that Han Shanyue, dressed in white, riding on the little Qilin, would suddenly descend like a divine soldier and save her from this calamity. Another hour passed by slowly. 3 hours, 3 hours. She was looking forward to every minute and every second. Every minute and every second, she was racking her brains to come up with all kinds of ways to escape. But this circle was getting smaller and narrower. There was no other reason. It was because when they were escaping, they suddenly found that there were more traps at the crossroads. These traps were colorless and transparent, the same color as water. Yifeng was once again dizzy from running and bumped headfirst into a net of mechanisms. The trap was like a spider's web. Once it caught someone, it immediately started to close. If Ning Shuima wasn't an expert in solving traps and quickly instructed Yifeng to solve it, the two of them would have been captured. But even so, Yifeng was injured by the trap and there were a few wounds on his body. After the two of them escaped, they were naturally more careful. Then they found that there were more and more traps, and many of the crossroads were blocked by the traps. Because of the endless traps, Ning Shuima and Han Shanyue's escape route became more and more difficult. Finally, after Ning Shuima and Yifeng desperately persevered for 4 hours, they finally met face to face with Yi Qingyuan in a waterway. Yifeng was running very pathetically, and Yi Qingyuan, who was chasing after them, was also not much better than them. She was holding a dead fish in her hand, and her hair was dancing in the water like a yaksha. Looking at Yifeng and Ning Shuima, her eyes flashed with madness. Let's see where you can run to. You two brats. I will make you pay a price worse than death. Behind him was the network of mechanisms, and in front of him was the crazed Yi Qingyuan. Yifeng and Yi Shiwen had escaped until now. They were truly at the end of their rope. Miss Ning, I'm sorry. I've dragged you down. Yifeng was distressed. He knew that there was no way out this time. It didn't matter if he died, but he implicated Ning Shuima. Ning Shuima also closed her eyes slightly. She had done her best. But Han Shanyue and Kiran never showed up. At this point, there was no doubt that Ning Shuima and Yifeng would be arrested. Sharkmen who had already run out of strength, and a cat without any fighting power. How could they be a match for a master who was about to break through the heaven realm? Yifeng was captured by Yi Qingyuan in less than 3 moves. The water bubble wrapped around Ning Shuima fell to the ground. Yi Qingyuan looked down at Ning Shuima. Her beautiful phoenix eyes were full of resentment and pride. Little bitch, you will pay for what you did today. At this point, Ning Shuima also threw caution to the wind. She was young and impetuous, and she knew that Yi Qingyuan would not let her go no matter what, so she might as well offend her to the end. Old bitch. You are so perverted, so sinister, no wonder you were kicked out of the sect. No wonder the ancestor didn't want you. Although Ning Shuima spoke in cat language, Yi Qingyuan had studied with the ancestor for a few years, so she understood the beast language. Chapter 677. Ning Shuima's words directly stepped on Yi Qingyuan's sore spot. She was so angry that the fire in her heart soared 10 feet high. She waved her hand and broke the bubble that Ning Shuima was relying on to survive. Ning Shuima fell directly into the water. Yi Qingyuan coldly smiled. Little slut, don't you like to run for your life in this water? Then stay here. She knocked out Yifeng and then crossed her arms as she looked at Ning Shuima. She wanted to drown her alive. This cat's body was unable to breathe in the water. Although she knew it was futile, Ning Shuima was the type of person who wouldn't give up until she reached the Yellow River. Even if she reached the Yellow River, she wouldn't give up. Until the last moment of her life, she would never admit defeat. She would never accept her fate. Yi Qingyuan's lips curved up. She moved to the side, allowing Ning Shuima to pass by her. This was an underground water vein. It was at least 7 or 8 miles away from the surface. With this cat speed, it was impossible for her to swim 7 or 8 miles in a single breath. Doing so was futile. Yi Qingyuan's heart was filled with hatred. She wanted to see this little slut who had ruined everything for her desperately struggling in the water, and then despair. This process was hell for Ning Shuima. But for Yi Qingwan it was a pleasant paradise. Han Shangyue didn't bring Kieran back to Carefree Island. Instead, he stopped at a place where Kieran could no longer contact Ning Shuima. There was a small city nearby, and there was a tea house in the city. Han Shangyue carried Kieran and directly entered the tea house. Although he was dressed like an emperor, when he landed in the small city, he used a technique to hide his face. Outsiders would only see him as an ordinary young master. Moreover, he was a young master with a powerful aura. He asked for a private room. The waiter brought in some good tea and refreshments, but he waved his hand and shooed the waiter out. The little Qilin was casually thrown to the ground by him, and had its acupoints sealed. It could only barely stand and couldn't run at all, let alone run off alone to save people. Kieran was so angry that she almost vomited blood. She stood there clenching her teeth as she glared at Han Shangyue. She wished she could pounce on this cold-blooded person and bite him. Cold-blooded animal. Cold-blooded bastard. Her master was fighting for her life, and he was in danger at every moment, and yet he was leisurely drinking tea here. Drink your fucking tea. The little Qilin couldn't wait to jump onto the table and piss into the teacup. Master! Master, how is she now? She must be in her heart. She must be hoping that this man would save her. She didn't think that this man didn't care. He even didn't inform Tianlan. What was he planning? What was he planning? The little Qilin's mute acupoint was sealed and its body was weak. Although it was so anxious that it wanted to vomit blood, there was nothing it could do. It could only glare at Han Shangyue, its eyes full of accusation. Han Shangyue ignored her. He waved his sleeves and pushed aside the refreshments and tea that the waiter had brought in. He took out his tea set as if he was performing a magic trick. After a while, the faint fragrance of tea filled the tea house. Han Shangyue picked up the cup and began to drink by himself. Time passed by slowly. While Kieran was restless, while Han Shangyue was leisurely drinking tea, 2 hours had passed. It was almost midnight, and the other guests in the tea house gradually dispersed. Han Shangyue sat in the private room calmly. He didn't seem to have any intention of leaving. The managers and waiters of the tea house had been busy the whole day. They actually wanted to close the shop and go back to rest. Chapter 678. The shopkeepers and waiters wanted to hug their wives and children and enjoy life on a hot bed. But if this guest didn't leave, they couldn't close the door. The waiter came up to give him a hint. But this guest seemed to be in a daze and didn't respond to his hint. This guest's aura was too strong, so he didn't dare to chase him away. He could only ask the shopkeeper to come up. The shopkeeper braced himself and expressed that he wanted to close the door. The guest finally came back to his senses and glanced at him. This glance made the shopkeeper's heart go cold and he shivered. He didn't dare to say anything else. Fortunately, the guest was more understanding. He casually threw over 10 taels of gold as payment for the tea. Finally, the shopkeeper's eyes lit up and he tactfully shut his mouth. With the gold in his pocket, he respectfully said a few words of courtesy to the guest before he happily went back down. The town was very small, so the tea house was naturally very small. Usually business was bleak. Even if they operated for a day, they might not be able to earn 2 taels of silver. But now they had earned 10 taels of gold. In this era, 1 tael of gold could be exchanged for 50 taels of silver. 10 taels of gold was equivalent to 500 taels of silver. The shopkeeper was rich. He didn't want to close the door. It was worth it to accompany this guest for an entire night. Moreover, this guest wasn't a busybody. He didn't ask for refreshments, nor did he ask for more tea. He didn't even let anyone serve him. This gold was too worth it. The shopkeeper and the waiters left. The room returned to its original tranquility. Another hour passed. Kieran couldn't bear it anymore. He pounced over and scratched the corner of Han Shanyue's robe with his claws. Han Shanyue seemed to be in a daze and didn't notice Kieran's claws. The little Qilin was trying to kill him. In just a moment, it had already scratched a hole in the corner of his robe. Usually, when he touched him with his claws, he would kick him 3 feet away. What was wrong with him this time? Kieran didn't understand and raised his head. He saw Han Shanhua twirling a white glazed teacup in his hand and gazing out the window. He didn't know what he was thinking. Kieran stared at the teacup in his hand and widened his eyes in shock. The white glazed teacups were the tea set that the tea house had just sent over. Even the tea inside was poured from an ordinary teapot next to it. The tea was no longer steaming, but the ancestor leaned closer to his lips and absent-mindedly took a sip. Han Shanhua, who was so obsessed with cleanliness that it bordered on perverted, actually casually drank other people's tea. If it was any other time, Kieran would have cried out in surprise. But at this time, it was worried about its master and did not have the time to care about Han Shanhua's abnormality. Just as it was about to pull at him a few more times, Han Shanhua suddenly looked down and brushed his sleeves. Kieran's throat felt warm, and he was able to speak again. Once he opened his mouth, he spat out a string of words. "You're a pervert. You watched as my master was in danger. Yet you stood by and did nothing. You even said that you were her husband. Is this how you act as a husband?" "She has never treated me as her husband." Han Shanhua's voice was cold. If he guessed correctly, Ning Shuima was only using him as a shield that was dispensable. He had always been the one chasing after her, so this time he wanted to teach her a lesson. Kieran's heart was still young and didn't understand the love between men and women. Of course, he didn't understand the psychology of sex. He only cared about the most important thing. "Didn't you say that you wanted to inform Island Master Rongyue? Then hurry up and inform her." Chapter 679. Why would he need someone else to save his own people? Han Shanhua was just waiting. Didn't that girl want Rongyue Tianlan to save her? With Rongyue Tianlan's speed, it would take her 6 hours to get here from Kieran after receiving Ning Shuima's call for help. Therefore, Han Shanhua decided to wait 6 hours before going to save her. He would let her be frightened for 6 more hours to learn her lesson. He had been living a peaceful life all these years and had never felt that time was so difficult. He had been sitting in this tea house for almost 4 hours, and this was the first time he experienced what it felt like to live a day like a year. He had always been calm when doing things, but this time he couldn't keep his cool. He seemed to be leisurely, but he was counting the hourglass in his heart. Kieran was angered by Han Shanhua's last sentence. It had now regained its freedom and glared at him for a moment before scolding. "You cold-blooded pervert." With a leap he jumped down from the window. Master was in danger and it wanted to save her. It wanted her not to be sad. Maybe it couldn't help her, but it wanted to be by her side when she was in danger. It wanted her to know that she was not alone. It had already remembered the location of Ning Shuima, so after jumping out of the tea house, it ran in that direction. "Master, you have to hold on. Little Apple is coming." After running for less than 100 miles, it suddenly stopped and felt dizzy, falling to the ground with a plop. It was so uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable. It felt like 10,000 bees had drilled into its head, and it was so painful that it felt like it was going to explode. There was a suffocating feeling in its chest and it felt like it couldn't breathe. It was the first time Kieran had experienced this feeling, and it was so uncomfortable that it rolled on the ground. "What's wrong?" Kieran's body became light and it fell into a person's palm. Kieran scratched its throat with its claws. Its originally blue face was purple and swollen, and its eyes were slightly bulging. It looked like it was holding its breath and choking on water. It forced out 2 words, "Uncomfortable." It was so uncomfortable that its eyes were a little blurry. It could barely see who was holding it, only a blurry white shadow. Needless to say, this person was Di Zun and also Han Shanhua. He originally wanted to stay in the tea house for another 2 hours, but since Kieran couldn't take it and left, then he should leave too. Forget it. He would save her 2 hours earlier and it wouldn't be too late to settle the score after saving her. This was his plan, but he didn't expect that the little Qilin would suddenly roll on the ground as if it was suffering from epilepsy. Seeing Kieran's uncomfortable expression, his heart suddenly sank. Ning Shuima. Ning Shuima's soul was connected to Kieran's body. Once her soul was really injured, soul was to die. Body. It's to die's / If half of the pain was enough to make the little Qilin wish he was dead, then what kind of torment was Ning Shuima, the main body? Did Yi Qinghuan really hurt her? Dizun didn't care about anything else. He picked up Kirin and once again used the 1,000 miles in a flash, and the earth-shrinking technique, to rush in the direction of Ning Shuima. His palms continued to transfer psychokinesis into Kirin's body. Finally Kirin recovered. Sense where she is. He had to find her as soon as possible. They couldn't afford to waste even a single second. Oh. Chapter 680. Kirin didn't have time to scold him at this time. She forced herself to use her spirit to sense for a while. Suddenly she cried out, I can sense her, but she doesn't reply to me. She just feels very uncomfortable. She feels very uncomfortable. She is going to die. Her soul is going to scatter. She must have fallen into the hands of that evil woman. She destroyed some of that woman's precious things. That woman hates her so much that she must want to scatter her soul. She destroyed Yi Qingwan's things? She didn't just save Yifeng and escape? The ancestor's voice was heavy. That's right, that's right. She hated Yi Qingwan for turning her into a cat without any explanation. In order to take revenge on Yi Qingwan, she destroyed Yi Qingwan's most important thing, burned down Yi Qingwan's house, and killed Yi Qingwan's disciple. The little Qilin told Ning Shuima everything that happened during their conversation. Bastard! Why didn't you say so earlier? You sealed my mute acupoint. You didn't let me say it at all. I even told my master that you were coming, and that you would save her immediately. I told her not to be afraid. She said that she would try her best to delay until you came. She also asked me to urge you to hurry up. She couldn't hold on any longer. She said that she had something to say to you. Kirin shouted as if she had broken down. Han Shanyue staggered slightly. He didn't say anything, but he increased his speed to the maximum. After Ning Shuima came to this world, she had been drowned twice. Both times the feeling was very uncomfortable. It left a deep impression on her. However, compared to this time, the 2 times she was drowned were nothing. When she was drowned to the extreme, one time she fainted, and the other time she opened the mouth of the sky. Whether it was fainting or opening the mouth of the sky, both were resolved. It was the body that was drowned, not the soul. At that time she didn't feel that her soul was injured. But this time she was obviously drowned to the extreme. She was obviously in so much pain that she wanted to scratch her ears and cheeks, but she didn't faint. Yi Qingwan didn't lie to her. She put some kind of curse on the cat's body. The cat's body was drowned, and her soul couldn't get out. She could only taste the feeling of being drowned again and again in the cat's body. She was so uncomfortable that her entire soul curled up. Her head was in a daze. How unbearable. It was so uncomfortable. He really wanted to faint. If only he could faint. Even if he had to die, she could feel her soul splitting apart bit by bit, as if water had also entered her body. Her 3 souls and 6 spirits were about to explode. She didn't know how much time had passed, but just when she felt that her soul couldn't hold on any longer and was about to disperse, her eyes lit up slightly. Her cat body was finally lifted out of the water, dripping wet. Someone patted it on the back, and Yi Qingwan whispered in its ear, "Don't drown my good little white." The cat was taken out of the water. Ning Shuima's dizzy mind cleared up for a moment. She forced herself to open her eyes and saw Yi Qingwan's beautiful eyes. Yi Qingwan was in a good mood as she finally caught up with the person she wanted to cook. She tidied herself up again and her hair was neatly combed. She looked elegant and picturesque. Seeing Ning Shuima open her eyes, she smiled. Her smile was quite gentle. "Little girl, you have to hold on a little longer." She wanted to play with her properly. Ning Shuima closed her eyes again. Her soul was a little injured, and her mind wasn't really clear. Only a vague thought flashed through her mind. This time she was really done for. She had held on for more than 4 hours, but there was still no help. You're tuning into the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.